on Friday.
I knew it was coming up, but yeah. Graduated.
I like Jay's use for it.
Yeah. Swamps right now. Does he get to get off work at all? I took off work.
Yeah, I think, well, today's Tuesday, so he hasn't taken up much.
Mine's about to be 5 months.
Oh, wow. Already.
It's a little relieving that he's gotten bigger, stronger. It's just, I'm feeling a little less stressed.
Alright, cut that out.
I did. I'm just trying to catch it before it hits the front row.
I stopped riding the bus, so like my immune system's probably not as strong as it was.
Yeah,
I do. I can't imagine.
it's a good idea.
We'll do brave the cold. We'll do 31st.
You haven't been there yet?
Yeah, not yet. We're gonna take the kids tonight.
You've got to shut off the traffic finally, so it's a lot easier. Well, this they did when we went on the weekend. I don't know if they have it that way during the week or not.
We've been paying $461 million in spending for lanes and $995.
Yeah, I don't understand that either.
Vacancy on TV.
Okay.
No.
Right there.
Thank you much. We're gonna need a vote, huh?
There you go. Push it left.
Okay then.
Do you remember Family?
Yeah, now try it.
Old enough to remember
75.
that show? Buffy, Jody, Mr. Punch.
Work?
Buffy's real name.
Capital Z.
Yeah.
That was my mother's favorite show when I was home. Stuff with Buffy.
Progress.
Is this yours, Frank?
Yeah.
And then I later married a Jones. And I really got stuck with Buffy's name. And I know 4 other people about the same age but also named Buffy. 2 of them I went to high school with, and 2 of them I went to college with.
Oh, jeez.
Keep it clean. It's so simple. Don't say like 2 of you.
What color is your book?
Doesn't matter if it stays up there. I don't care. Reference it.
Black, I do believe.
Sign of the times.
People Uncle fall asleep. Yeah, these are the old ones.
Okay, I'll share with Michael's.
Just look shorter. It's on here. The new one's on here. Yeah, the new one is on the laptop too.
Okay. Thought I'd turn that off.
Okay, it's 120. I got a hard deal.
I don't know. We got a lot of them. Shame on you. Okay.
There.
Oh, excuse me.
from what we think are the consents?
Unintelligent person, number one.
I haven't heard of that.
Okay.
Question mark.
Good afternoon. We'll come to order. Good afternoon and welcome to the December the 19th, 2017 convening of the Baltimore City Board of Municipal and Zoning Appeals. A few house rules before we get started. First, if you have a cell phone, a pager, anything that makes any kind of electronically generated audible sound, plays a ringtone, a chime, etc., we ask that at a minimum you please turn those devices to a vibrate only, if not off position. Similarly, if you have a need to have a conversation with someone, we ask that you please take that conversation out the double doors to your rear. And the reason for those rules is pretty simple and straightforward. You'll note that there are a number of microphones which are arrayed around us up here, and those microphones are all very sensitive, not only for the purpose of amplification, but they're also for the purpose of recording. And cell phones, pagers, things going off, conversations, etc., generally not only are generally disruptive to the conduct of these proceedings, but also interrupt the recording of these proceedings. In addition, those of you who are sitting forward of the wall behind you can see that there are 3 video cameras which are mounted on the wall there, and there are 2 video cameras which are mounted on the wall up here behind us. These proceedings are being recorded for broadcast. They're actually being streamed live on the website for the city's cable access channel, as well as recorded for subsequent broadcast on the city's cable channel, and also recorded for posterity for the city's YouTube channel as well. So cell phones, pagers, conversations, and the like also disrupt that videotaping process as well. We'll be voting at the end of the day, and you're certainly more than welcome to hang around and enjoy a civics lesson if you so choose. But if you've got anything else to do on this late December afternoon, get some shopping done, etc., that's certainly understandable, and you can call into the zoning board office in the morning and find out how we ruled on your case. If you take out pen and paper, I'll read the number for the zoning board office a couple of times. And that number is 410-396-4301. That number again is 410-396-4301. You will, however, need to wait until you receive the formal written notice of the outcome of your case. That should be forthcoming in about 3 to 4 weeks before you'll be able to get your permits. And we certainly ask that you please not build in the city of Baltimore without first obtaining all of your proper permits. If you're in opposition to any case today, we ask that you please sign in on our sign-in sheet, which is being held up right now by Mr. French. The sign-in sheet allows us to generally know which cases have opposition, but also allows us to know who needs to receive those aforementioned written notices I just spoke about. In addition, some matters may be postponed, and so if that happens, we need to know who you are and how to find you to let you know when those cases will be going forward if they do not go forward today. So again, if you're here in opposition, please make sure that you've signed in on the sign-in sheet. The procedure for our hearings today are the same today as they are for all of our hearings, but for those of you who are uninitiated, you'll come forward and your case is called, and the appellant will stand to our left or your right. The opposition, if any, will stand to our right or your left. Once everyone is up here, we'll get you sworn in, and then once you are, we'll commence with the appellant who will be given the opportunity to discuss the case, tell us generally about what it is that they're proposing, present any documents or witnesses, etc., in support of their positions, make their arguments to the board, and answer any questions which the board may have. Once they've concluded, the opposition, if any, will then proceed to present their side of things, their arguments, documents, witnesses, etc., in support of their position. Once the opposition is concluded, we'll go back to the appellant who given the opportunity to respond to any points brought up by their opposition, and then also to add a closing statement. once, we won't be going back and forth, unnecessarily delaying things. Pardon. We'll be generally hearing the cases in the order they appear on our written docket. However, there are some preliminary matters which we'll first dispense with. First, we have one case where there's a posting issue. 2016-372, the north side of Graceland Avenue, 625 feet of Ogden Street. This is Nicholas Vasilarakis. Okay, they're not here. All right, don't have to deal with that. Next are the cases which appear on our consent agenda, and our consent agenda consists of cases where the zoning board staff has already reviewed these files, and the board has concluded that on the basis of what we have in the record thus far, we have the ability to approve these appeals on a consent basis. We'll call all the consent cases together as a group, so I'll call them in order, and then if you'll come forward as you're called, and then just try to stay in order. Once you're all up here, we'll get you all sworn in as a group, and then we'll call each case in turn, and you will be given the opportunity at that time to offer any additional evidence that you would like to have added to the record at that time. First case on the consent agenda is 2017-448, 2604 Gibbons Avenue, Ronald Marriott. After that, we'll hear 2017-451, 4015 Foster Avenue, Emily Sokolinsky. And 2017-453, 1625 Thames Street, Caroline Hecker. (2017-456) 3907 West Strathmore Avenue, William Broadus. 2017-459 3828 Hickory Avenue, Charles Atwood. And finally, 2017-462, 3738 Goff Street, John Lee. Okay. All right. If all those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands and be sworn, please.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right, calling first case on the consent agenda, 2017-448, 2604 Gibbons Avenue, Ronald Marriott.
We are getting the permit to enclose her front porch.
Yes, sir. And you're Mr. Marriott?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. French, anything from the planning department?
Martin French for the Baltimore City Planning Department. Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Marriott, was there anything additional that you would like to have added to the record at this time?
I have two other pictures of other houses on the same block with mine.
Okay, and your name, ma'am?
My name is Mary Hoyle. I'm the owner of the property.
Okay, you can pass those up.
Sure.
All right, and is that it, folks?
That's it.
Okay. Zoning board staff, having previously reviewed your application, we have determined that there is sufficient information to approve your appeal. Good luck.
You.
Have a happy holiday.
You too.
Happy New Year. Take care. Next, 2017-451, 4015 Foster Avenue, Emily Sokolinsky.
Hi.
Afternoon, ma'am.
Afternoon.
Ms. Sokolinsky, we have this as an application to use a portion as a personal services establishment. That is one-on-one personal fitness training services with a licensed professional. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Ms. French, anything on behalf of the planning department?
Yes, thank you. The Planning Department recommends approval of the application, subject to the condition that the applicant continues to provide off-street parking for the personal services establishment in accordance with the parking requirements given in Table 16-406 of the Zoning Code. Thank you.
Okay.
Today I have Mr. Wayne Goddard, who is the landlord of the premise, is here to speak on that.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for letting me
Goddard?
speak today. I'm Mr. Goddard, the president of the Goddard Companies, which is the developer of the project. First of all, we're extremely excited about this project. It's our first foray into Baltimore City ever, and I cannot believe the energy in this city. So congratulations to all of you for a great project. We have recently engaged Curry Architects to plan a parking scheme for the side of that building, but we've also removed some fencing and have created, by virtue of removing that fencing, at least another 20 parking spots, even if they were to be parallel parked along the side of the building. So being able to achieve 8 dedicated parking spots, which is what Emily had asked for in her lease, will be no problem whatsoever. And we'll have that before any permitting of the project begins.
Okay. I don't know if do we have drawings that were submitted reflecting that?
Probably not, because literally we just engaged the architects.
Okay.
Like last week, they did the BOMA survey of the building. The next step is to develop the parking plan. We're redeveloping the building substantially, and we need drawings and mechanical drawings and things of that nature. But the lease is not intended to commence until July of 2017. We just wanted to take, 2018. We just wanted to take this time to get the, this is the broker here. He's got, he gets the commission, so he knows when it commences. So we just, we just wanted to make sure we did things in the proper order. Once we got the approval, so we could design the space. Emily's our first tenant in the building. There's been tremendous interest, so we're basically going to be designing the parking, and that will be submitted with her use and occupancy request.
And the establishment is 2 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet. We will be getting exactly 4,000 square feet. So that would just be 8 parking spots. So we meet the criteria.
Okay,
Probably
great.
most likely will be more.
Great. If I could ask just that once you do have those drawings, if you could then forward those in. We've got that showing right now.
That was our concept plan that we had
Yeah.
done that shows the interior layout of the space. The parking spaces run along the alley that is sort of on the long side of the building, not Haven Street, obviously, the other alley side.
Yes. So once you have those, if you could just update what we've got on file, that should be fine. Anything further?
No, sir.
No, sir, thank you.
Okay. Zoning board staff, having previously reviewed your application, we've determined that there is sufficient information to approve your appeal.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Yes, you may.
Have a good holiday, everybody. Thank you.
Next, 2017-453, 1625 Thames Street. Caroline Hecker.
Good afternoon, Justin Williams, filling in for Caroline Hecker from the law firm Rosenberg Martin Greenberg, joined today by Doug Schmidt, who's affiliated with the applicant.
Afternoon, folks. Mr. Williams, we have this as an application to paint 731 square feet of building ID sign on the 3rd floor of the southeast wall of this structure. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Mr. French, anything for the planning department?
Yes, thank you. Planning Department notes this property is located in the Fells Point Historic District. Therefore recommends approval of the application be subject to the condition that all signage placed upon the structure comply with the terms and conditions of the authorization to proceed issued by the Commission for Historical and Architectural Preservation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Williams, those conditions say by the planning department acceptable to you?
They are.
All right. And anything further you'd like to have added to the record at this time?
Package of exhibits in support of their appeal. They include 2 letters of support from the Fells Point Residents Association and the Fells Point Preservation Society.
All right.
There'll be no axe throwing?
Not here, different location. Though an errant throw might end up here, right?
Anything further?
Nothing further.
All right. Zoning board staff, having previously reviewed your application, we've determined that there's sufficient information to approve your appeal. Good luck. Have a happy holiday.
Thanks, MB.
All right. 2017-456, 3907 West Strathmore Avenue, William Broadus.
Good evening, general contractor for 3907 Strathmore.
Afternoon, sir. We have this as an application to construct a 1-story rear addition with rear deck at this location. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. French, anything for the planning department?
Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
All right. And Mr. Broadus, anything further you would like to add to supplement the record in your case?
No, nothing else to add.
Okay. Zoning board staff, having previously reviewed your application, we've determined that there is sufficient information to approve your appeal.
Thank
Good
you,
luck.
sir.
Have a happy holiday.
Y'all too.
Thank you. 2017-459, 3828 Hickory Avenue, Charles Atwood.
Yes.
Afternoon, sir. we have this as an application to construct a one-story rear addition with a rear deck at this location. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. French, anything from the planning department?
Planning Department has no comment on this application. Thank you.
All right. And Mr. Atwood, anything further you would like to add to supplement the record in your case?
No, not at this time.
All right. Zoning board staff, having previously reviewed the application, we have determined that there is sufficient information to approve your appeal. Good luck. Have a happy holiday.
You too.
All right. And one more time, 2017-462, 3738 Goff Street, John Lee. All right. Now we'll turn to the remainder of our docket, which will include cases where opposition is signed in. And frequently we found that opposition is the result of lack of communication or miscommunication between the parties, and it can be useful to offer the parties an opportunity to have a dialogue amongst themselves to see if they can resolve whatever differences they have. Obviously, if there are two sides engaged in a dispute, and those sides approach the board seeking a resolution to the dispute, one of those two sides is bound to go away disappointed. And so this is your opportunity to avoid that unhappy fate. I'll call out the cases where opposition is signed in. You can just stand where you are. I'll ask if there has been any dialogue between the parties, or if the parties would like to continue, or if the parties would like to have a dialogue or continue to have one now. You're certainly not obliged to take the opportunity to speak with one another, but we certainly do encourage and appreciate it. First case where opposition is signed in is 2017-369, 220 East 31st Street, Carlton Gilbert. Folks, and who signed into that case? All right, and Councilwoman, has there been any dialogue with the applicant here?
Yes, we have been meeting.
Okay, any hope for a resolution at all, or?
Well, we hope so.
Okay.
Sean Hughes and Carlton Gilbert for T-Mobile. We have had several meetings, and we've been pleased to delay this a few times.
Mhm.
We have reached an agreement with the HOA. They have submitted a support letter. We've worked with one of the neighbors next door. We think we've made some concessions that may help that neighbor, but they're here because they may not be fully satisfied.
Okay.
We'll probably just ask for a postponement so that we have time to look at the relocation plan for the structures if we fail in our effort to just oppose this.
Okay. So they're looking to postpone. Any desire to entertain that?
Mr. Chairman, we're not looking to relocate it. We have postponed it 2 times. We have an agreement with the HOA. We have planning staff support. We have historical trust support and CHAPS staff support.
Okay, so it sounds like you can attempt to have a dialogue now and see if you can get something worked out, or.
I was at the meeting where all kinds of alternatives were suggested, and Able Improvement Association, which is the neighborhood where it's located within the greater Charles Village area. People there are very concerned, and we'll testify.
Okay, have a seat and we'll call you in turn.
I think we should testify.
Well, we're not calling the case right now, folks.
Okay,
I just
good.
want to ask if there's been a dialogue.
Yes,
If
it's
the
been-
folks don't want to speak, just have a seat, we'll call you in turn, and everyone will deal with it then, okay? All right, thank you. Next, 2017-404, 2934 St. Paul Street, Patrick Agbu. Okay, and folks, again, has there been any dialogue or hope for a resolution in this case?
There's been tour and dialogue, yes.
Okay, any hope for a resolution?
I believe not on my part. I just received indication that they want to oppose my application.
Okay, all right, have a seat, we'll call you in turn. Next, 2017-413, 2000 East Baltimore Street, Nate Prettle. Who signed into this case, 2017-413? 2000 East Baltimore Street. Okay, any dialogue or hope for a resolution?
We've had a significant amount of dialogue, and I think it's just going to come down to we have a disagreement. So I think our case is important.
folks? Yes?
Yes. Need to testify.
Okay, have a seat. 2017-436, 3327 St. Paul Street. Also, well, now it's Mr. Berry.
We've talked, and we'll look forward to the board's presentation.
Okay, have a seat. 2017-454, 1501 Edmondson Avenue. Anyone signed in this case? 2017-454, 1501 Edmondson Avenue. No?
We have a letter.
Letter, ah, okay. Gotcha, but no person. Okay, have a seat, sir. 2017-458, 4901 Frankfurt Avenue. Sasheen Maple. All right, and Mr. Hilliard?
Yes.
Okay, any dialogue or hope for a resolution here, folks? I'm sorry?
We can't talk, yes.
Oh, you can't? Okay.
That's fine with me.
Okay. All right, step out and. Okay. Two 2017-454, 1501 Edmondson Avenue, Jean Uzukwu.
Is that the first case?
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon, sir. You're Mr. Uzukwu?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and sir, we have this as an application to use the premises as 3 dwelling units. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. If you would raise your right hand and be sworn, please.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. And Mr. French, well, first of all, do we have any staff reports?
Yes, we have a letter dated December 19th from the president of the United Urban Roots Foundation. They write, I am writing to oppose the zoning appeal filed for 1501 Edmondson Avenue. In opposition, I organized a meeting with my neighbors to prepare letters, and I intended to forward to your attention. However, we decided just to cut to the heart of our concerns. Over a year ago, I was approached by the appellant. He expressed his frustration with the community for not supporting his request to have a multiple unit dwelling. I told him that I was a Harlem Park resident and president of the United Urban Roots, and that I would vote against plans with more than 2 units, unless the investor was willing to work with the community to ensure that we would not have to deal with issues that typically plague large multi-unit dwellings. However, despite my personal feelings, I suggested he contact the Harlem Park Neighborhood Council for an opportunity to express his views to the entire community. I attended several association meetings where he was given a chance to speak each time the community opposed. To make matters worse, the appellant sent an email inviting his peers to a meeting in Harlem Park which contained the phrases, boots on the ground, galvanize, skin in the game. The email was anonymous, forwarded to me. I shared the email with my neighbors. We attended the meeting to express our frustration with his reference and military tactics. I offered to meet with him to discuss a compromise. He stated that at this point, he was willing to move forward without community support. In addition to our concerns are a lack of parking, rent gouging. Several of my neighbors on that block say that $850 for 1 floor, that is more than my entire mortgage. I did not see anything in his plan for affordable housing. Lastly, the property does not have the appropriate 750 square foot per unit to support the request. For the preceding reasons, I urge you to vote against the proposed rezoning. Then we have planning's report.
Planning Department reviewed this application, noted that it is a proposal that is not prohibited by the urban renewal plan for the area, and the department has no objection to the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Uzuku, why
Yes.
don't you tell us about what you're proposing here?
My goal is to reestablish the property's multifamily dwelling status. Historically, it's been used as the 5-unit. I believe its last authorized use was as a 5-unit in, I believe, 1975 or 76. It's been vacant, for the past 30-plus years, and, I felt that an optimal approach would be to downsize density from 5 to 3. And in that process, I've engaged the community several times. My engagement with the community dates back to 2011, and I'm very sensitive to their concerns around trash as well as parking. And, I've, for the past 6.5 years when I was living in Washington Village, Pigtown, I've dealt specifically with issues of trash, illegal dumping, abandoned vehicles, and so forth, to the extent of working closely with housing code enforcement, working closely with sanitation to actually change policies, change procedures around trash collection in that community. I take that very seriously. I have no intentions of investing in any area to become a nuisance or to become, to diminish or deteriorate the fabric of any community. And, I have a long-standing record of championing quality properties, quality places to live, and I want to create that in this community as well. I have photos that can document what I've had to personally deal with in terms of combating illegal dumping and trash and so forth. In terms of parking, my initial thought, the property does have space in the rear where you can maybe put 1 to 2 parking spaces. That's definitely being considered. Given its proximity to the West Baltimore Market train station as well as the potential red line, it would be considered transit-oriented development. But I'm open to trying to accommodate 1 to 2 parking spaces and maybe 3 if possible with a potential curb cut. In terms of trash, I have every intention to provide the units with proper receptacles large enough to maintain both refuse as well as recyclables. I think part of the thought process is to determine what's the proper avenue for tenants to place their trash, whether they go outdoor, whether I create a space internally where they can get to the rear of the property. If I create a space internal to the property, that will reduce the livable square footage. So, there's kind of give and take, and nothing has been finalized at this point. The floor plans I have are all conceptual. But again, I'm very in tune with the community's concerns. They are extremely important to me. And again, I have no intentions of creating a nuisance or becoming a problem. I'm not looking to invest and take this risk to become a problem for the community.
So you're going to have unit 1 is basically 1,700 square feet on 2 floors?
Right. The basement and the first floor is going to be considered the first unit, and the second and third unit, the second unit on the second floor, third unit on the third floor. And, part of my thought process was, in terms of 3 units, was that, if I get 3 tenants in there and can pay down the equity, I would possibly like to keep the third unit as my primary residence. Mm-hmm. I've run into hard times over the years where I didn't have much to fall back on, and just by the grace of God, a letter of employment came through, which allowed me to kind of continue and sustain. But I have a large family in terms of nieces and nephews that are all coming up. Some of them are looking to Baltimore to go to college and so forth. So, for me, that third unit is like a landing spot when you do have hard times for my family members. And again, I'm not sure if you all want this documentation or not in terms of the photos and images.
Sure.
And then lastly, I think, here's the email correspondence dating back. Here are the images of, what I had to deal with from 2004 to 2013 and 14 regarding combating illegal dumping. And then, again, I think my plans are consistent with the rest of the block. The other 2 adjacent properties are zoned as 3 units as well, and I just had to register the property, paying a fee based on a 5 unit. And so, again, I'm looking to just simply downsize the density and create quality living opportunities.
Do you want us to make all these documents part of the record?
Sure. And then, lastly, in October, I've attended several community meetings with the community. Again, I've come to the community with my cards face up. There's no hidden agenda or anything of that nature. I've always maintained that, the economics of a 2 unit simply don't work. I don't think anyone in this room would make an investment going into it knowing that they're going to, end up in the red every month. And I presented that to the community as well in the presentation. And then lastly, This was my first project in Baltimore where, you know, I dealt with a lot of illegal dumping. This property was formerly a drug house, which was transformed. It's currently now a single-family, single-attached row home that I basically have grad students renting. And this is also the copy of the property registration. You know, funny thing, through that experience, I learned that fingernail polish can remove graffiti on the side of a vehicle.
Well, this shows an address of 508 Scott Street.
Right, that's the property that I initially renovated.
Okay.
It's my primary
This was your
residence.
first one,
Right,
right.
and this is where all those photos of illegal dumping,
Mhm.
working with Eric Booker and Housing Code Enforcement, working with John Chalmers and Sanitation to actually change the collection strategy, the collection times, working with DPW to get a street light on the city-owned parking lot adjacent to the property, working with DPW to put a security fence along the front to enhance safety, not only for me, but also the pedestrians that walk up and down that street. If you go by there today, this is totally different. I think I was a big part of that transformation. I want to basically duplicate that in Harlem Park if I'm given the opportunity.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
So that we could wait around till about 5 o'clock.
Well, possibly it could be that late, but hopefully it won't be. But
Okay, this is the other registration.
Thank you.
And I guess you have a copy of the letter from planning?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Happy holidays.
You too. (2017-460), Nate Prettle. Afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, Mr. Prettle, we have this as an application to use the premises, to use the first floor of the premises for a convenience store. Is that correct?
That is correct.
If you would raise, well, I guess you've already been sworn.
Actually, I have not.
Oh, you want? Okay, well, in that case, yes. If all those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands and be sworn forth.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Do we have staff reports?
Planning Department reviewed the application, noted that this property's application did not specify the specific type of use that would be made of the property. The department has no objection to the application. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Prettle, why don't you tell us about what's being planned here?
Sure. Good afternoon, Nate Prettle, AB Associates. I'm here with Fausto Gomez, who's the property owner and will be the operator of the future convenience store if we should be approved today. This property, I don't know if anyone, you're able to pull it up on your device here, but it's a clearly commercial end unit corner store, typical throughout the city, on the corner of North Monroe Street and Penrose Avenue in the Franklin Square neighborhood. Mr. Gomez, who will be the operator, actually lives above the property, and this is something that he came to me a couple years ago with, actually, or under the city's old code, as the board is all too familiar with, this being in an R8 zoning district and having lapsed its historic commercial use, was not able to be approved, unfortunately, even though I believe it had community support at the time. Under the city's new zoning code of Transform Baltimore, we were applying for the neighborhood commercial use. When the application was submitted, it was for a retail establishment, which is the land use classification provided under the code. At the zoning board staff advice, I clarified that the day that it was filed to a retail convenience store. And Mr. Gomez operates several others throughout the city. He previously operated one, a block away on the 100 block of North Monroe. And now that he lives above, he wants to continue his investment into the neighborhood. This property is exactly what the city envisioned when they enacted the neighborhood commercial establishment provision as a conditional use. And unless there's any other questions, I would urge the board to approve it so this can continue to improve the neighborhood and ultimately be an asset. And again, with him living above the store and operating it, this is just the type of use envisioned under Transform Baltimore.
Okay. So this is a neighborhood commercial establishment application.
That's correct.
And what do you know about the property history?
I know it was originally constructed, from everything that we were able to find, that it was originally constructed as a commercial establishment, used as such up until maybe 15 years ago. And the city's records, unfortunately, and we'll get into this a little bit in another case coming up this afternoon, are not always complete, and they're not always available. But if you look at the property, visually, the inside of it, it's clear that from everything we were able to find that this is originally constructed and continue to be used as a commercial property. I don't know, Mr. Gomez, do you remember the last commercial use that was on the first floor, what exactly it was?
It was a carry out.
Carry out.
Carry out. Just looking to see what records we have.
Sure. If I could reiterate, these specifically, this type of property was what the city had in mind when they enacted the neighborhood commercial provision. As the board saw, probably 100 times during these board members' tenure on the board, was that you did not have the authority to approve it under the old code, and now we're here asking with your authority for this conditional use approval, and we meet the conditional use standards. Conditional use is presumed to be permitted under state law. There's no more adverse impact at this location than any other similarly zoned property in the immediate area. And we've reached out to adjacent neighbors in the community association. We haven't heard anything back, but for Mr. Gomez living there and being on the street, it's my understanding that they're excited to see this establishment open.
Okay.
We do have from the records from 1983, which authorized the first floor as a grocery delicatessen. At that time, research had gone back to the 1931 police survey, and it was noted that the use at that time, it just says a store and a dwelling unit.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
So we have records at least back to 1931 to show that it's been a commercial use on the first floor.
That's precisely the use that we're proposing today, a store and one dwelling unit.
Okay. Any other questions?
No.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't go far. 2017-461, 1924, 1926, and 1928 East Pratt Street, also Nate Prettle. Okay, and Mr. Prettle, we have this as an application to raise the existing structures, consolidate 1924 East Pratt Street, 1926 East Pratt Street, and 1928 East Pratt Street, and construct a four-story multifamily dwelling housing 20 units with 13 off-street parking spaces. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. If all those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands and be sworn, please.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
All right. Do we have staff reports?
Yes, we have a letter from the Upper Fells Point Improvement Association dated December 18th. They write, "We respect that the referenced appeal, the Upper Fells Point Improvement Association is unable to take a formal position either in support or in opposition to the development. The membership will not have a chance to vote on the motion related to this property prior to the hearing. The developer presented their concept at its May meeting. The association membership appeared to be supportive of the plans in reference to density and parking, but had some concerns with certain features of the building's design. The developer stated that they are willing to discuss concerns with the association and some of the residents who live near in the vicinity of the development. The association has received letters from the applicant dated 12/18/17, and the association looks forward to working with the Butchers Hill Association, the appellant and the property owner with the design elements of the building. Does planning have a report?
Planning Department has no official comment on this application. However, the department would like to note for the record that the board's previous approval for 1926 to 28 Pratt Street, which was heard on the 20th of June of this year, included these 4 conditions, which perhaps should be considered for carrying forward for approval of this particular application. The proposed redevelopment is completed in accordance with approved site and development plans. The Pratt Street and Washington Street walls will be constructed of brick. The existing curb cut on Washington Street will serve as a driveway leading to parking underneath the new building. There will be no new curb cuts. And the 4th floor and the rooftop deck will be adequately set back from view from Pratt Street and Washington Street. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a letter from the Butchers Hill Association. It's dated December 18th. They list 3 terms or conditions that they would like to have imposed for support. The Pratt Street and Washington Street walls will be constructed of brick. 2, the existing curb cut on Washington Street will serve as a driveway leading to parking underneath the new building. There will be no new curb cuts. 3rd, the 4th floor and rooftop deck will be set back from the 2 main streets so that neither structure can be viewed by a person standing on the sidewalks along Pratt Street nor standing on the sidewalks along Washington Street. Let's see, we have been furnished the attached letter from AB Associates dated December 18th. In this letter, the appellant and the property owner pledge to continue to work with both the Upper Fells Point Improvement Association and the Butchers Hill Land Use Committee throughout the process of refining the building's final designs.
Is that it? Okay. All right. Mr. Brettel, why don't you tell us about what's being proposed here?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm joined by Dan Hagan, who is the property owner and the eventual developer, as well as Virgil Bartram and Kurt Schiller, who are their respective community association representatives, and we can hear from them in a minute. As Mr. French mentioned, I think it's important to view this zoning request in context of the prior approval, which was nearly 6 months ago to the day on June 20th. The board made the required findings for several variances necessary to approve a 4-story building with, at the time, 16 units and 11 parking spaces. After that approval, Mr. Hagan was offered the opportunity to purchase the adjacent property to the west on Pratt Street, which led to a slight redesign and the addition of 4 units as well as 2 extra parking spaces. We've been continuing to meet with Butchers Hill and Upper Fells Point as recently as last week. As their letter stated, I think everyone is in agreement that it's a proper use as well as, parking ratio, but there are some design concerns, and we have a letter. I think this is included in the Butchers Hill letter, but I'll submit that. And we've always pledged to work with them. This can memorialize it as part of eventual approval. I'll mention a little bit in terms of the variances being requested. They're essentially the same as before in terms of lot area and parking. The percentages remain close to it. However, there is a slight change with the new code. Before, we were granted a FAR variance that no longer applies, and the total height is actually under what's allowed for a corner multifamily property, which is 45 feet. We're under that, so we're not requesting a height variance where we had a FAR variance before. I don't know how much the board would like me to get into the standards, seeing as the board had already made the required findings, but what applied before continues to apply today. And I just add, well, we look forward to working with Butchers Hill and Upper Fells Point on a number of design issues, which and I think we were going to work on anyway. But Mr. Hagan, would you like to add anything?
I think you summarized it pretty well. Really, the neighbor and I just had a conversation after the approval last time for 1926 and 1928, and she lives out of the city and said she was interested in selling. That was really what made the building get larger. She was interested in selling to us. We thought it made a better project. We were able to add more parking by adding her lot. So that was really the only reason why we redesigned, and we're before you again. Just like with the last set of plans that were approved in June, we're trying to work with both Upper Fells Point and Butchers Hill, because we want it to be a project that is very suitable to the neighborhood. We are property managers in the neighborhood. The reason we're active in the neighborhood is because we love the character of it. And so we're trying to bring a project that is suitable to what's already there.
I will add one more thing before the community members speak, is that, as Dan said, this is a very important corner in Butchers Hill. You know, there's two primary streets that, you know, as you come up Washington, the large hill, this is what you're going to see. And the quality of the buildings there right now is lacking. I think that's why the community supported, you know, demolishing them. We wouldn't be seeking to demolish, you know, historic structures. But the design of the building is similar in scale and scope, almost identical to what was approved before. And we've removed there was a rooftop structure that was on the original plans that we've already committed to remove and is not on the plans before you today.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Virgil Bartram for Butchers Hill Land Use Committee. I would like to confirm what you've just heard, and I have a hard copy of the letter that was sent this morning to Mr. Tanner's office. And I have to agree that the developer has worked well with the neighborhood and seems very willing to continue to do so. We had some problems with the design, and he's pledged to continue to work with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kurt Schiller, the Upper Fells Point Improvement Association. As stated, you know, we did not have a meeting, so we really can't have a formal position for or against, but we're very grateful that the developer has ongoing and still is very willing to work with the communities in regards to our concerns with the exterior or anything with the parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else? Any questions? Thank you.
Great, thank you. I will add that we're excited to hopefully have a great addition to Butchers Hill and Upper Fells Point. Thank you.
Take care. Have a happy holiday. 2017-369, 220 East 31st Street, Carlton Gilbert.
Good afternoon, Sean Hughes on behalf of T-Mobile, along with Carlton Gilbert. We also have some other potential witnesses here to help with any questions and such. So first, thank you for the opportunity.
Slow down.
Yes, sir.
Let's get everybody a chance to get up here. Okay. You can use the microphone that's to your right, and then the opposition will get to use the one that's to your left there. All right, and your name again, sir?
Sean Hughes.
Okay, and Mr. Hughes, we have this an application to install a new rooftop telecommunication facility consisting of 8 panel antennas and 1 microwave dish with rooftop equipment. Is that correct?
It is. The plans also do show potentially 4 additional future antennas, so it could be up to 12 total.
Okay, but the current proposal is only for 8.
That's correct.
Okay, and for if you wanted to add any additional, you'd just come back for modification for that.
8 and 1 microwave.
Yes, and a microwave dish.
Yes, sir.
All right. Folks, if all those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands and be sworn, please.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
All right. Do we have staff reports?
Yes. First, we have a letter from the Charles Village Civic Association. It's dated December 15th. They write that after more than 2 months of meetings with the Charles Village Land Use Committee, adjacent neighbors, and representatives of the Able Improvement Association working together to accept a written agreement on conditions, the Charles Village Community Association supports T-Mobile's application to install new rooftop telecommunication facility See the attached T-Mobile Conditions Agreement letter dated December 6, 2017. That letter was attached. In addition, the telephone building property owner, Day Capital, agreed to paint the adjoining wall of the Verizon building facing East 31st Street and also to construct an attractive replacement wood enclosure for the building's dumpster located on the Guilford Avenue side by February 1st. We have a letter from the Able Improvement Association dated December 19th. They wish to go on record in opposition to the above reference installation and support of the concerns raised by our members and a fellow resident. The letter from the resident is attached. As other attached correspondence dated to 1998 indicates, management of the property at 220 East 31st Street has been problematic from the onset of the conversion of that site into an apartment building. We oppose this body's granting a variance for the dumpsters, which the appellant describes in her, which the neighbor describes in her letter, and we continue to believe that the variance should be rescinded for reasons enumerated by the neighbor. We cannot support yet another variance being granted for this property. We on the right one? Yeah. Okay. There is a letter from, Okay. Where's this letter from? It doesn't have a letterhead.
That's okay, it's in the record.
Okay, they list several items. The installation of the proposed T-Mobile equipment on the north side puts this equipment just 15 feet horizontal feet from our home. The proposed equipment would also be 12 feet above the third floor of our home. Despite related assurances from T-Mobile and its contractors, as well as an agreement by T-Mobile to test the site for radiation and signal interference after the installation has been completed, it is simply not acceptable for this sort of commercial equipment to be installed so close to a private residence. Our concerns are threefold. Though the research and findings on harmful effects of constant exposure to this low level of radiation is conflicted, there is sufficient evidence to suggest that the potential for deleterious effects on our health and our family due to constant close exposure to low-level radiation from the equipment is a real danger. There is a potential for signal interference with phone and Wi-Fi signals in our home, and we are concerned about the loss of value of our home, as there is abundance of evidence, for example, like the summarized webpage, Values Declining Cell Towers, of the negative effects of telecommunications installations on the value of adjacent resident properties. The board has that document. And then there's planning's report.
Thank you. Planning Department reviewed this application, noted that this property is within a historic district, and recommends approval of the application subject to these conditions, in addition to any conditions the board may establish. Where visible from the street, the antennas and related equipment must be painted to match the building to ensure they are visually unobtrusive. Panel antennas and related equipment will remain mounted as illustrated in the plans and elevations submitted to planning, and the applicant will adequately mitigate any adverse effect as specified in the report of the Historical and Architectural Preservation Division of the Department of Planning in accordance with that report's recommendations. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. And Mr. Hughes, are those conditions stated by the Planning Department acceptable to your client?
They are.
All right. Why don't you tell us about what's being proposed here, sir?
Yes, thank you. So as relayed, putting antennas on the building and the structure on top of the equipment so that it will allow. The reason is to improve the wireless connectivity in the area. Capacity is the biggest issue that is happening with so many of us using our wireless phones and pads. It requires almost like widening the roads. You need to put more and more antennas up so that people can have connectivity and have the latest and the fastest and the speeds that they're looking for. So in order to do that, T-Mobile obviously has brought this proposal before you. This is very similar to many proposals, dozens to hundreds that have come before this board over the last 20 years. My first one was around 20 years ago. And quite frankly, if they didn't have to build this install, and they could save a lot of money for the construction and the rent, and if their customers would have the service they need, they'd be better off. But the customers are demanding more and more, and it's also to meet capacity needs now and with the next generation, the fifth generation of technology, which is on its way. As was mentioned already, we have attempted to work with the community, and we do have the Charles Village Civic Association support where we've made those commitments to the community, and also we're able to get the landlord to make concessions of painting the building for the resident nearby and others, and also to enhance the screening around the dumpsters on the ground.
Could you spend a minute and talk to us about how federal law relates to state law?
Yeah, great question.
Does it preempt state law?
Yeah, especially so as this board in the city is very aware. The Section 47, 332C of the USC code, that's the Telecom Act. And one of the things the Telecom Act says is that local governments are preempted on a health issue provided the applicants are going to be in compliance with the FCC's guidelines, which is like every applicant that's had to come before you has to make sure that they'll be in compliance. T-Mobile has gone a little bit further than probably most because they have tried to work here, in that we've already gone out and we've done, as probably mentioned in the letter, we've done a baseline test, and we have a radio frequency engineer here, but the baseline test shows that it's barely 1% up to the 100%. That's now before we're there. And when T-Mobile goes there, the levels are so low, it's not going to move the needle. It's still going to be at 1%. The emissions from these base antennas are extremely low. They're lower than the cell phones we put next to our heads. They're lower than Wi-Fi routers that many of us have in our houses. They're much lower than baby monitors that many of us have in our houses, once you get outside of 3 or 4 feet from them. So it is dangerous, yes. If somebody was to climb up on top and grab an antenna, there is danger with that for a long time. But they are placed so that cannot happen. There are proper safety monitors and signage that goes up. So from a health perspective, and T-Mobile also agreed to do 2 additional tests for the neighbor. One within 3 weeks after it was installed, if we're fortunate enough to get approval and to get our building permit, and one about 3 months after to show, because we're very confident. We've also done computer models, and these are sites very similar we have in the city, the state, throughout the region, throughout the country. We do believe that as I said, these are installs that this board's been seeing for many, many years. We believe it's very similar. We believe it meets the local code here, zoning code. We're pleased that we could get the staff support. We have had discussions with the CHAP staff, and they're satisfied with the designs. We're trying to balance the design needs of staff, planning staff, CHAP's planning staff. We also have Maryland Historic Trust, SHPO support, and with all that, it's again to meet this huge data drive. And I'd like to show, I think one thing that may not be in your package is photo simulations of what the install would look like. So, Chairman, if it's okay, I could pass out some of those.
Please. You can show them as well to the opposition.
Absolutely. And I'm not sure if the opposition has a copy of the letters, but we haven't seen any of their opposition letters if they have an extra copy.
I don't have one.
Do you want me to walk down?
No, you can just pass them up.
And then I can quickly explain what they are.
All right. Extras there.
So the first one is obviously it's a bird's eye view looking towards the building. You can see in the yellow it says site. And now we have 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is the locations where photos were taken. So that if you flip over to the next page, when we say photo simulations, obviously we didn't put the antennas up yet, but we do this quite often where we show roughly what it would look like. So this first page there shows the flush-mounted installs. That's for 2 of the sectors. As it says in the bottom left, it says Photo 1, view from Guilford Avenue looking southwest. And in the bottom right corner, you can see it shows the original conditions in a smaller picture. If you flip over to the next page, it shows view 3 and view 4. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped a, missing a page.
Yeah, I think we must be just missing one.
Are you guys missing a page as well?
Yeah.
My apologies. I have some other copies here, and I'm a little low on the copies. Let me give one to the opposition.
Sure, thank you.
Let me, I'll let you make it out.
Yeah.
Apologize.
That's all right. That's all right.
Yep, no, it's okay. I got some more. See him on the Sandy. I do have a few more, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. Okay, my apologies. So on page 2, you can see it says in the bottom left-hand corner, photo 2, view from East 31st Street looking northwest. And then it shows the pole mount locations with the antennas. And then if you go onto the next page, it shows from the 4th sector. View 3, view from Guilford Ave, looking northwest. And then there's one more, photo 4. So again, these are not exactly what they look like because it's not up there, but these to give an idea of what it would look like. So in wrapping up, we do have the landlord here. We have several members from the T-Mobile team. We have a radio frequency engineer. We have two radio frequency engineers, one here who talks about the design, one who can talk about health questions.
Mm-hmm.
We also have Mr. Carlton Gilbert, Mr. Jeff to talk about any T-Mobile generated questions. We believe that we have worked hard to get support here. We believe it's an appropriate install. We believe it will provide value by enhanced wireless connectivity. And we believe it meets the zoning code, and we hope that the board will be inclined to vote in favor.
Okay.
Does T-Mobile own the equipment, or is this?
Yeah, yes, T-Mobile owns equipment, and they typically rent space from landlords such as here.
The only reason I'm asking is there's other corporations like SiteLink and Crown that will do the infrastructure, and you'll lease that from them?
That's right. Yes, as you all have seen, there's been what's starting to come also small cells, which are going on city lights and other structures. And in that case, sometimes a host provider like Crown Castle will be the overall landlord. They'll manage all of it. The wireless carriers, still where they can, are often deal with landlords themselves and have, there's probably close to 1,000 of these sites already within the city on many buildings and other locations, existing towers, water tanks and such.
Okay. Let's hear from the opposition, and then we'll go from there. Councilwoman?
Yes, we have, we'll have a chance to have the 3 of us heard, correct? Mm-hmm. Thank you, sir. My name is Mary Pat Clark, Baltimore City Council, and thank you for this opportunity. If I may just read what I wrote and then say a few extra things. Mr. Garbett is going to speak. He is the neighbor who lives within 15 feet of this property and of the towers. Their 3rd floor would be within 15 feet of these towers, and Dr. Cole, his wife, who could not be here today because of a medical appointment, often works from home. At the least, for their health and to avoid interference with their Wi-Fi and phone signals, they oppose this appeal, and I join them in this opposition. The Coles Garbert's fallback is to have requested a relocation of the towers to roof locations further from their home. Yet the installation plan and contract were already accomplished. They were done deals. By the time the Charles Village, by the time the local Able Improvement Association and neighbors and I learned there were proposals at all. So federal dictates, you quoted, do not in any way make it mandatory to ignore requests for relocation of these towers to keep them farther from the immediately next door, across an alley from the tower's property. We also have, yes, there are reports that are mixed about the damage that can be done from constant exposure to the low levels of radiation emitted by such towers. We've all lived through being assured of things for years and years that one day we open up the paper or turn on the TV and we can't do that anymore or use that anymore or eat or drink that anymore. And I'm very confident, because I've been involved with this to a degree in relation to schools, I'm very confident that we will find that there are problems, but I understand what the federal rule is at the moment. That's why we asked for a postponement, because although T-Mobile already turned down that request today, you heard it, but also at meetings with the neighbors after we all were told about this. Even so, we would like you to consider it because the feds don't say no to a relocation on a roof to keep people further away from any effects. And it's not just health. It's also the efficiency of their own Wi-Fi and phone systems in their houses, which they are very concerned about, because at least Ms. Cole, Deborah Cole, you know, makes her living there and cannot have her systems complicated. And I'm sorry she's not here to describe her work, but it's no play. And so finally, I would say that T-Mobile said at meetings that it could not afford to redo the plan and the architecture that they had worked out before we even knew about the plan. And they couldn't afford it. And if I'm misquoting, let me know. But they will test after the fact. But if they couldn't afford it when they needed it to get approval, why would they change it, whatever they discover later? They couldn't afford it, would be the answer. Finally, I'd like to say that the host building, telephone building, we have a long, long issue about trying to get the dumpster cleaned up. And I know that sounds like a small thing, but they had to, I believe they had to come to this board in order to get variances that spoke to the location of the telephone building dumpsters when that was converted from a business location to a residential location. And we have worked and worked to no avail. And these very next door neighbors, it's right next to their house because it's not in front of or in back of the telephone building. It's beside it, but beside it on Guilford Avenue is where all the front lawns and front steps of the Guilford houses are. So you say, well, so what? Well, so what a lot, in that was a variance that has never been properly observed. Years have gone by. And so here's another variance with promises of tests and promises of change if necessary, but certainly one of the parties involved we know is not quick to jump to correct things, even if it's been said under oath, or even if it's been said as part of an agreement for a use. I'm glad to answer any questions, but these, my colleagues live immediately there, and I would like them to have a chance, if that's okay now. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Joanne Robinson, and I'm representing the Able Improvement Association today. I'm a member of the executive committee and the immediate past president of the association. And we have a long history with this apartment building, as Councilwoman Clark has just indicated. The offending dumpster, there are pictures there if anyone wants to look at them. Able's fundamental issue with this, above and beyond all the technical questions, is that, as Councilwoman Clark also has already said, all of this was planned, the contract was signed, it was a done deal, and our community didn't know about it until the zoning hearing, the first posting of the zoning hearing went up. We greatly appreciate the good offices of Charles Village Land Committee, but by the time that process began, the whole question of where this would be was already off the table. We had no choice about that. And then we were told, really, we don't have any choice about changing the plan either, because that would be too expensive for T-Mobile. So the agreement that was brokered as far as monitoring after the fact simply does not satisfy Mr. Garbert and his wife, Dr. Cole. And Dr. Cole has been at all of the meetings and has been very, very clear that this just does not work for them the way it is now, and that she will continue to oppose it, and as our member, we will continue to support her in that.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes,
when you talk about location and change, are you talking about moving the antenna to a different spot on the roof of this building?
That was one request that Dr. Cole made. If we had been able to discuss this as a community before the whole deal was done with the apartment building, there were other possible options in the neighborhood where people would really have liked to have seen the towers and where there wouldn't have been so much interference with residential patterns. But that was totally off the table before we even started talking. But once we did start talking, we did request that the towers be moved and changed to be less intrusive into her house.
Okay. Sir?
Yes, my name is Hadley Garbart. I'm the resident at 3120 Guilford Avenue. My wife's Dr. Cole. And our opposition, number one, is that the way T-Mobile did their contract with the owner of the building, but more so, we're concerned with three things. There's no guarantee about what harmful effects low radiation has. There's no guarantee that the signal will interfere with our Wi-Fi communications, and there's no guarantee that the being next to telecommunications towers will reduce the property value. So that's mainly our concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, is that it? All right. Mr. Hughes?
Didn't know if Ms. Sparks from the Charles Village Civic Association, would it be okay for her to speak?
Sure.
The Charles Village Civic Association has a well-established land use committee which meets monthly, and as notices appear from the BMZA or the Liquor Board or Planning Commission, we proceed to investigate and ascertain support, opposition, or remaining neutral for each case that comes before us. In due course, this case was posted for the BMZA, and as I do routinely, I immediately began to contact the property owners and to have them come and present to the the Charles Village Land Use Committee, which meets on the first Tuesday of each month. And I also, because this property is on Guilford Avenue on the west side, it's clearly in Charles Village. The able boundaries are also are Guilford Avenue. So it's really, Charles Village is a greater area, and frankly, our original boundaries are 50 years old and extend up Greenmount Avenue. So we met a couple months ago. It became clear. Dr. Cole was there. Joanne was there. There were additional community members. And we immediately arranged to have a tour. And I recognized that there was no way that within a short time that we could resolve this. So the hearing was postponed. We then went to the site, and Dr. Cole came out, and we walked around it, and I negotiated the improvements to the building. It's pretty clear they needed improvements. The dumpster is disgusting, and the wall needed painting. Deborah's chief concern was the location of the rear antennas. Being within her house is on the parallel to the alley. So there's an alley separating the two buildings. And she works up to the third floor, so it's not a question of, well, she's downstairs and it's not a problem. It was very clear it needed to be, the conditions needed to be good for the whole height of the building. At the meeting, we discussed the possibility of moving the antennas at the rear up onto the roof, which Debbie said would be okay, but we did not receive any true interest in doing that. We did then proceed to have an agreement about conditions and about, very seriously, about the review of the installation, the testing of it by an outside contractor named in the, who does that certification work, who could certify the levels of radiation. We weren't depending on T-Mobile. We wanted outside confirmation. And so all of that is in that 2-page agreement. We then, as we routinely do, agreed to support, and it was voted on by the Charles Village Board of Directors. And all the correspondence and letters were shared with Deborah Cole and the able president. So I think the Charles Village Civic Association acted in good faith to ascertain what was the best solution here. And we recognize it doesn't, there's still questions, but we kind of reached the point where this was acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Anything further, Mr. Hughes?
Yeah, just quick few points. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there was a question, or there was claims that potential interference with Wi-Fi, phones, TV, etc. They have their own FCC spectrum. That's why there's not interference throughout the city already, because there's many antennas up. But we did prepare a document that T-Mobile, again, puts in writing that it doesn't interfere. They have an FCC license. If there is any interference, the FCC can call them in, and we're happy to fix it. It doesn't happen. Here's a copy.
Can I ask a question about that?
That's an agreement between whom?
This is a letter from, and we have the T-Mobile radio frequency engineer. This is something that they prepared that says their frequency won't interfere with other equipment. I mean, that's why the FCC spectrum is handed out by the FCC so that there's non-interference.
Is that enforceable by a homeowner?
Well, they can contact the FCC, yes.
Oh, right.
Yeah, could I hand this in,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman? And if I could, the other thing, there was also some, I think the councilwoman, she missed the last meeting, unfortunately, that we had with the Charles Village Civic Association, which was a few weeks ago. And we did talk about, they asked us to explore it. I know they're not happy that we didn't move the location, but we did explore it, and we explained that there's a few things if we were to alter the antennas they were asking for. First thing is, we have support from planning staff for the current design, and also the CHAPS have said they want it to be less visible. The suggestion from Dr. Cole was to raise it up higher. Raising it up higher would make it more visible. There were some structural concerns about that. The other thing is to move it up 10 or 15 feet. Again, it would make no difference in the emission level because it's so minuscule to start with. It doesn't move the needle either way. There was also some discussion about schools and health. So I could submit 2 documents that the city itself did from 2013 related to that bill from the law department and also from the IT department that talked about health is not a reason for the city to deny it, and also talks about how low the emissions are from these site levels. For the record, if I could. And just to clarify, I think the board's aware of it, but sometimes we interchange words, or the people on the other side may. We're not putting up a cell tower. That's a brand new standalone tower. What we're doing is putting antennas up on an existing building, which is what the city encourages through their co-location program.
Can I ask a question? Please. What would it cost you to reconfigure the way you've laid out your towers? We know you can't afford it, or it's been said that that's why it couldn't be done, to move them either vertically or horizontally farther away from these immediate neighbors. What is what was the bid?
She wants to know how much
does
would
it
it cost to move it.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of that number. One thing I would like to clear up, I wasn't at the meeting she's references, but T-Mobile people are here.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that it's too expensive. There's a lot more involved, obviously, in our business model. When we have sites already existing, you have to look for areas that will fill in those needs.
I do have one question with respect to that.
Yes.
There was some testimony that the community wasn't necessarily opposed to the towers per se. It was the specific neighbors at this specific location. Was there any research or consideration done to looking at other alternatives within the community at their suggestion?
The question, when I became involved in, we were leading up to and had our last meeting about 3 weeks ago with Charles Village Civic Association. The suggestion was from Dr. Cole to raise the antennas up on that location. You can see, raise them up about 15 feet higher. That's what we explored. And as I said, there's a few challenges with that. One is that CHAPS wanted less visibility. They were happy with the design that we've proposed. We also have plenty of staff support there. And if we moved it up 15 feet, it would not make any difference whatsoever in the emission level at her house. There was also some structural concerns, as I mentioned, but we have Mr. Noel Garcia here, who did his company did a test already for a baseline. He's been in this industry for a long time, and he can, if you have concerns about health issues, which I know the feds have kind of said, if it's in compliance, it's not a reason to deny, and we're here to certify it will be in compliance like all of our other sites.
What?
He is here. He can answer any specific questions about the baseline, and as he said, in good faith, we agreed to do these 2 additional live tests to show that it's going to be at 1% of 100. And FCC also built in a 50 margin level. They built that in. So I know some folks aren't going to believe government, but we believe that they've built in strong numbers here. The credible sources show that these are very low powered, And the city has done its own research several years ago. It's very low power. These installs are lower than the cell phones that many of us carry around and put up near our ear.
If I may say, if the community, including Charles Village, had been involved before contracts were signed and plans were already established, we could have, I think T-Mobile could have redesigned to avoid the kind of concerns that the next door neighbors have. This building has been an ongoing concern. The building has been an ongoing concern about this dumpster, which you say, well, what is one dumpster?
The dumpster is not in front of us.
I understand, but we know the compliance level.
And the
And so-
dumpster is run by the landlord of the property.
I understand who is the one that is the customer
towers here.
who is leasing the property. I understand what you're saying. But this, we are paying the penalty here, all of us, from Charles Village to Able, of not being in on when the planning was done. But to come in after the fact of it. And so that's why I'm stressing
On that point, I mean, I really don't want to carry this on any longer than what we've already gone on
I
for.
understand. Thank you very much.
But, I mean, I think that at a certain point, you're just talking about rearranging the deck chairs. You're always, if you're going to make it further away from someone, it's going to be closer to someone else. And the underlying question is whether or not there's any, I mean, the reason why you're talking about investigating these different potential modifications as far as to the siting of the antennas is out of a concern for health. And so the question then becomes, is there any reason to be concerned with these antennas? And I think that that there's evidence in the record on that point. So,
Okay, I'll leave off. I'll just say, Mr. Chairman, I respect what you're saying. I know this debate. All I'm saying is, we're paying a price for not being involved at a point where it wouldn't have mattered so much. And it is of grave concern, and it's not a decided issue. And the federal government will, I know that you believe that they will. We know in this case, if there are complaints after the fact, we'll have to go to Congress, literally, in order to even get a return call, not from the people standing here today, but from the federal government about the concerns. Thank you.
all right, thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, 2017-404, 2934 St. Paul Street, Patrick Agbu.
Good afternoon.
Any opposition?
We're over here this
Yes.
time.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Agbu, we have this as an application to use the premises as 5 dwelling units, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. If all those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands and be sworn.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Staff reports.
Planning Department has reviewed this application and has no objection to it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Agbu, why don't you tell us about what you're proposing here?
Okay, the proposal is to use the building as a 5-unit building. It has in the past been used as a 6-unit prior to my purchase of the property. And the way the apartments were divided, because they are very large spaces, made it difficult after I think the last owner collapsed it to 4. I didn't realize it when I was purchasing the building, but I'm aware of it now. Now, I went to the association to discussed with them what I could do, to remedy this. And my proposal is if I could combine the first two floors, or rather the second and third floors, to one apartment, although they were very large, to be able to rent them. Again, this is an old building, but I have been maintaining them, as best as I could, given my resources. Yesterday, I received a letter saying, after showing the association the property, I received a letter saying that they are going to oppose it, which was, really baffled me. The reasons that they gave were that the zoning had been, historically 4 units. They failed to identify the fact that it has been 6 when it was built. Again, it says the tenants have poor quality of life, which is not very good. My tenants don't say that, and they are appreciative of the fact that they can rent this property for the rental that I pose, and they enjoy living there because it's a good environment. Although it's an old building, but it's not luxurious, and they appreciate living there. It says that the kitchens were not functional, which baffles me. The kitchens have all the amenities, the basic amenities that the kitchen should have. And when they were taking a tour, I showed them this. They said that the rooms don't have closets. There were closets there. They didn't ask me, specifically to point them out. So all these, they say the design of the apartments was, rabbit wearing, something like that. Of all this, I really don't see why if the code is adhered to. I believe that 5 units is reasonable. It's only 1 additional unit so that I can manage the property without having more difficulty. The issue about parking behind the building has a large space behind it. One part of it is paved, the other is on gravel. I offered that I could, redo the gravel part to put additional parking spaces. The basement unit, again, they said it doesn't have closets. That's not true. I have pictures. Unfortunately, I couldn't print them. I have them on my computer, which I brought here if you would like to see them. They have all the 2 bedrooms in the basement have closets. There are 5 windows in the unit. There are 3 doors, 2 are external doors, and they are above grade. The way the property is located, it slants to the back of the building. And as a matter of fact, the basement apartment can come in without going through any steps. It's on the level. So I'm appealing to the board to approve this. And if it cannot, the only thing that I want to ask is to perhaps allow me to use, maybe redo the first floor apartment into a 1 apartment, so that if it comes to that the insistence is on 4, then I could use it as 4 based on collapsing the 2 units on the first floor. That's my presentation.
Okay. To show the existing use as being 4 dwelling units and 1 rooming unit.
4 dwelling units.
What is the current existing use of the property, sir?
When I checked the records, on, I believe.
No, what's there right now?
Right now?
Yes.
It's 4.
Okay. All right. Is there a rooming unit that's there as well?
I believe not. It's just 4 units, I believe.
Okay.
The authorized use was 4 dwelling units and 1 rooming unit. That's how it was licensed, not as multiple dwelling. diagram, it didn't break down where the rooming unit was, however.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have any record of 6 units that I heard mentioned.
All right, so there are 3 floors in the building and a basement.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
All right. And how are the apartments apportioned between the floors right now?
Right now, 2 apartments on each floor and the basement apartment.
Okay, if there were 2 on each floor plus the basement, that would mean 7.
Yes. I inherited it that way, until I realized this problem.
Okay, so you already have it set up at 7 currently.
That's the way when I purchased it, it was run. So
Okay,
I continued to
but
run it.
regardless of who did it, I'm trying to say, what is there now? If I left right here and walked in the front door.
7, you would
Okay.
say, yes.
How many are occupied?
All.
So you have 7 tenants in there?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. And Mr. Chaney, you said that we've got our record showing the existing use of 4 dwelling units and 1 rooming unit. That's the current authorized use through the multiple dwelling license, correct?
Yes.
All right. And that's the most number that we show in the permitting history?
Yes. I'm looking for that.
I have a card record that I got from BMZ. I don't know if it helps.
The multiple dwelling licensing we have dated back to 2006, and it's been annually paid, and I assume inspected every year since. So there's an annual license fee that's required, and it's been kept up to date since 2006 until 17.
Well, I guess my question is, and I was thinking the same thing as you, is if it's inspected yearly and it's licensed for 4 dwelling units and 1 rooming unit, how did we get to 7 units?
No.
So you're saying it was 7 units when you bought it?
Yes, that's the way it is when I bought it. But when I looking back now, that it was not zoned for 7. The way it was partitioned, allows you to separate them because originally they were built as 6 units. That's why it has 2 bathrooms, 2 kitchens on each floor. But then, for some reason, I think the back kitchen were removed when I purchased it. I didn't realize it then until this problem surfaced.
Okay. And so he's passed up the zoning summary card for the property. Shows going back to 1957, licensed as 6 apartments. Then again in 1960, May of 1960, and again in 1961. And it looks like in 79, it was changed, 4 dwelling units. And then can't sort of make out the rest of it. But then in 86, 4 dwelling units with 1 rooming unit, and then the same on since then.
1971, when the last comprehensive zoning ordinance went into effect prior to the current one, there was a provision that required properties that exceeded the density to roll back.
Yes.
To bring them into compliance with the density. And that's probably what triggered that change from 6 to 4 and 1 room.
Right.
All right. Thank you, sir. Ma'am.
Sandra Sparks, Chair of the Charles Village Land Use Committee. We met with Mr. Abgu at our last meeting, and then 2 days later went on an extensive tour of the property with, and the adjoining property owner, Greg Charlo, joined us. So we saw every room in the property and the backyard.
And one thing we do want to be clear on is that, so we're here for a variance or minimum of the minimum lot area. The requirement is 750 square feet per dwelling unit. The request is for 5 dwelling units. So what's being requested here is a 2% variance.
Well, I would ask
So
that
if the community has designs on significantly altering that, I'd say that at 5, he's pretty close to what he's allowed as of right. Now, that doesn't mean that he's entitled to a variance of that amount, but just needs to be sort of in the contemplation
I
of
understand,
everyone.
and
So what's the community's objection?
the condition of the property, the fact that it's been operating as 7 apartments.
Okay,
in
well, he's
very,
not going to operate as 7.
Well, it's kind of tells you.
He says that it was that way when you bought it.
Well, I'd like the adjoining neighbor who's lived there since the 80s to talk about that. And I think the backyard, which has a garage, and if you see the condition of that, that doesn't, zoning would not be happy with that.
That's code enforcement.
Well, I'd like Craig Charlo to say.
Sure.
Yes, I've owned 2932, the adjoining property, since 1989. And from that time until this gentleman bought the property, it was being used as a normal apartment house with no more than 4 units, long-term tenants. And since this is not new in the neighborhood, this gentleman owns multiple properties within the same 2 to 3 block area of St. Paul, Charles, Calvert. So the idea is to take whatever the living area is and divide it up as much as possible to stuff as many people in as he possibly can. The property was not 6 units or even 7 units when he bought it. There has not been a contractor to come to do any work at the property. It's all done by this gentleman and his family, whether it's the roof, whether it's... When he first bought the property, there was a lag time between the time that he actually took the settlement and the last time someone else was there, and the grass, which is a small area in the front, had grown to above your waist. We called, my wife and I called, left a message for him. His response was to come out and pour an accelerant onto the front lawn and burn it. And it's been that kind of a relationship. He hasn't done anything that would be anything other than stuffing as many people in as possible. I've taken photos for you of the backyard, which offers very little, if any, parking, and a dumping of concrete, which has been there for approximately 2 years, give or take, plus a plethora of wiring that can only be described as a nightmare. On the tour that we took for the interior of the property, there wasn't one unit that didn't reek of odors reminiscent of the inability to have any sort of ventilation. None, 0. And there is no closet space to any degree. Every single apartment is a pile of personal items all over the place. And in addition to that, the backyard garage, which was always a garage, was just made into this apartment that has no windows, has no one door in and out. And as I said, there are, on the same block of St. Paul Street, he owns 2 other properties. And around the corner, several others. And the pattern is very consistent. It's just plain to see what it is. There were 4 units that were long-term rentals where people actually had multiple rooms and could go from one to the other. And now if you try to walk through the hallway, it's a maze. It's this narrow and it's a maze. And there were air fresheners and heaters, space heaters. The fire hazard is something I worry about on a regular basis. It's been used as 7 as soon as it could physically be used as 7. And it seems to me to ask to go from 4 to 5 when you're already using it as 7 doesn't, the irony there is lost on me, but I don't know what else to say. It's a gross violation of human dignity in that apartment house.
And I also wanted to add that we researched, oh, sorry. Thank you, Greg. I wanted to add that we were appalled by the conditions inside and then learned that Mr. Abu owns 13 other properties in Charles Village. So this, and we've also heard stories about other properties where mowing the lawn is not an issue. It's called torching. Anyway, or girdling a tree because it's in the way. So I'd like to submit this, and I would request that the BMZA check out all of these properties for the number of units.
I do want to say, and I hear what you're saying without commenting on whether or not it's true or not true, but just remember, we're a land use body. We're truly not a code enforcement. We don't have that authority. Yes.
Mary Pat Clark, Baltimore City Council, 14th District. I've worked for many years with Charles Village Community Charles Village Community Association, and many of the neighbors on this very block who have come in and made a big commitment to the neighborhood as well as to renovating a lot of these houses and trying to stabilize this block and part of Charles Village. It's a mixed multifamily and single-family neighborhood on this block as well as throughout Charles Village, which makes it attractive and keeps it a place that people want to live. And it's interesting. It's exciting there. I would ask you, not to support, however, this variance. It might be just 2%, as you say, but we're talking about a place that reportedly is renting out 7 apartments. And this is a gentleman who apparently is in the business of landlording, certainly in Charles Village, and he should have known that somehow he had stumbled into an existing violation and tried to correct it. I would hope that he would correct it if he is not granted the 5 units that that's being asked for here. That if he could revert to the 4, it would, because that's a whole.
Remember, it's 4 plus 1.
The rooming unit, yeah, and I'm not sure where that fits in, but I
don't think it's there either, but I'm saying that's what the current.
I got you. Well, we're not opposing that. We're just opposing the granting of a variance in the middle of that land use situation that should exist, and unfortunately does not.
To point out that he's close to the current request is close to what is allowed as of right. So if he were not able to get 5, he would be able to do 4 to simply because he's got sufficient, he'd be able to do 4 as a matter of right. To the extent that the community wanted any less than that,
less than
there's
4.
not, yes,
4 and
there's
1.
not really a mechanism to get to
that's,
that.
That's not what they're just saying.
That's not what I am saying that you are. I am coloring expectations.
All right, so basically, This community is asked to, is in opposition to this variance request. It does relate to, I understand you're saying it's just a 2% variance, and that's small compared to the 25% maximum, I guess. So we would ask you to meet us in the middle. The landlord needs to get rid of some units that he inherited, let's say that. And we would like him to do that. And then after he's done that, and we have an inspection that says that that's what's now happening in this building, that's the time for a variance to be considered. If this honorable board would just consider that, he can come back in a couple years after. He's going to have to ask certain residents to leave, and they deserve some notice. Then he's going to have to get architectural plans to undo the damage that has been done by his predecessor, and then to put together what he's entitled to, after which you might be on the house tour.
I may not have the resources that you are proposing to do all these.
I know you wouldn't.
I'm within my, what my resources allow.
Sir, we're not really looking for a dialogue between the parties now.
So this may take longer than because of financial considerations, but whenever it happens, which we presume it will, at that point is a time to look at this variance, minor as it may appear. It will just complicate the issue, the land use issue that we have. Thank you.
Can I ask a question as a layperson?
What is it?
I paid for 4 hours.
No.
I paid for 4 hours on
No.
a parking meter. If I exceed it, I'm going to get a fine. If this property is zoned for four units and plus a rooming unit, and it's been misused up to this point, then what's I don't understand. Why can't we just use it for what it's zoned for? Isn't that the
Has
purpose?
anyone contacted code enforcement? Councilwoman, can you explain that process to them?
Okay, I was just trying to take the apple so you would have both hands to use. Oh, no, well, you call Mr. Nyabagosi. He is the chief of zoning enforcement. And he will send an inspector, or he will send a multifamily inspector, and they will go through. They come he renews his license every year for 4 units, correct? And if he does,
There was a recent inspection. That's how we found out about it.
so Ms. Sparks says there was a recent inspection, which is where this all began, apparently. Then I guess a complaint went in from the Charles Village, and to respond to it, the owner has appealed to the board.
Okay, and so
for 5.
As part of that process that you were talking about, if the inspector goes out and finds there to be violations, don't they typically write up a violation notice?
Yes, sir.
And typically, doesn't that violation notice require that the landowner either bring the property into compliance, and if they don't, then they get fined for every
Correct.
they're out of compliance, or they can pursue this process and seek a variance. Correct?
Correct.
And so while they're pursuing that process, the enforcement of that violation notice is stayed, typically, correct?
Yeah, while they're waiting for their appeal before the board.
Okay.
Correct.
So,
about how many?
does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Not
It's been used in one capacity for 10 years of monthly rentals, and
But
now
this-
we're
but-
asking, is it being used properly?
Just all we're asking is for you to turn this down now and wait for a more timely opportunity when we get back into the conformance with what the code requires, and he has the chance to reduce his tenancy and to get back into code in terms of what he's allowed to have there under his registration, and then if he wants to apply for a 5th unit, and he's in good shape with having 4 plus 1, I would ask this board to give us a chance and wait till that time. This isn't, until that might happen. And, yeah.
I implore the board, though, to, give me a chance to make the building 5 units, and I will do, what it requires to do that. That's all I ask.
Do you know what the requirements are under the law for the granting of a variance, sir?
Yes, I have, through this process, the square area, that needs to be done.
It sounds like you're reciting what the requirements are as far as, you're supposed to have a certain amount of square footage per unit, et cetera.
Yes.
But I'm saying, do you know what the criteria are for the granting of a variance?
No, actually, I don't know the in-depth of it.
Okay. So typically, you need to show that there's some sort of a hardship that arises from operation of the code that you're seeking relief for. And as part of that, you need to show that your property is somehow unique. That is, that there's something about its character which is different, which makes it different as insofar as how the zoning requirements apply to your property, and that's what creates the need for the variance that you're requesting. So this, as I can tell, is a row house, right? It's a rectangularly shaped lot.
That's correct.
Just the same as all the other rectangularly shaped lots surrounding it, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And the condition that the property is in is that it somehow or another, whether you did it or your predecessor, it somehow or another has found itself with 7 units when it's only allowed to have 4 plus a rooming unit. And so now you're here asking for 5, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. During my meeting with the Civic Association, I did explain to them why this came about and the difficulties, that it creates for me managing the property. I did that to the Civic Association when they were present. I believe that was part of, trying to convince
the testimony of your neighbors, it sounds like you're running a tenement.
No, well, I don't think it's true.
Well, I wouldn't imagine you to come in and say that it was true, but
yes,
we've heard testimony from people who were actually inside of it who reported what its condition was. Do you have any photographs to disprove what they've said?
Yes, I do. Actually, I could not print out the photograph because of the short time.
That's okay.
But
the
if you can
baseline
send
threshold, though, sir, is that you need to show that that you meet the requirements under the code for the granting of a variance. So we'll have to figure that out from the evidence. But thank you all for coming.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Could I put a last, if the board could send somebody, an independent party, to come and look at this, I will appreciate it because
the board doesn't do that.
The board doesn't do that.
I'll be
I'm sorry.
glad to send someone.
Because
I'm
all
sure
they
you will.
reported is wrong, and
I will.
That person's not gonna work out well.
All right. Yeah. 2017, 2017-413, 2000 East Baltimore Street, Nate Brittle. Oh, no, we already did that one, didn't we?
We did not.
No, we didn't.
No, we do not.
No, I was looking to. Yeah. I know it's there. I'm just walking through. All right. Mr. Prettle, we have this as an application to continue to house 5 dwelling units with 1 garage and a parking space, with one garage parking space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. If all those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands and be sworn, please.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
All right. Do you have staff reports?
Yes, we have a letter dated November 6th from the Butchers Hill Land Use Committee. They write that the committee opposes this appeal. The lot size of this property is only big enough to allow 2.93 dwelling units. We're quite familiar with the property. It has been single-family over 20 years, but apparently the former owner added a kitchen illegally without building permits and without proper zoning. There is an historic carriage house on the back of the property, but the carriage house doorway is so narrow that one car can barely fit inside. There is no other provisions for off-street parking on the property. We also have a former letter dated, where is it dated at? Not dated, from Councilman Sharon Sneed of the 13th District, indicating that there are many questions and that she would have wanted the case postponed to speak with the association. That appears to have started. And then Henning's report.
Thank you. Planning Department reviewed this application, also reviewed the records available to it, which indicated that there was a permit issued for use and occupancy of 3 dwelling units that was canceled in December of 2016 due to its being inactive from an original approval in 2007, because that approval had been contingent upon continued multifamily dwelling licensing, which had not occurred. The previous approved use of the property was as a single-family dwelling in 1982, and there is no record of 5 dwelling units ever having been approved at this location. On that basis, because this property is located in an R8 zoning district, the Planning Department recommends disapproval of the application. Because the board is not authorized to approve conversions of a single-family dwelling to multifamily dwelling use in the R8 zoning district where this property is located. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Prettle.
Good afternoon. Another exciting 5 dwelling unit case in front of you today.
5 or 7.
And the same people keep changing sides here.
They're welcome to come onto our side. We're happy to have them. But so there's a couple issues at play here, and I'll start by saying that the request in front of the board is based on a long history of uses at this property, which I'll detail in a minute, as well as the lot size and floor area available in on the site, which is, and I'll get into this, but it's unique to this particular site. But the first issue that's brought up by the Planning Department, I think needs to be addressed, is whether or not this is considered a conditional use conversion requiring City Council approval. My clients here, Marshall Klein and Don Samaret, are the co-owners, or partners owning the property, which they purchased at auction, when, was it several months ago? September. So when they were looking at the property, I had a meeting with the zoning administrator where we detailed the history of the property, including the last authorized use. Mr. Klein here was party to that meeting on a conference call, and it was the decision of the zoning administrator based on this history, including the last occupancy permit, which was 3 units. The planning department says it was canceled. You know, I don't know that that is a specific term. He may be referring to the provision under the former zoning code where if a use lapses for more than a year, it reverts to single family. Under the code that we are currently operating on, that is no longer a provision, and it was removed specifically for that reason. You know, a conversion is intended to apply to typically a row house property that is a single family, is used by one family, and is intended to be physically converted into multiple units. This has never been the case with this property. There is a long history dating back to, as far as I could find, the police survey from 1931 of being used for multiple units as well as commercial. In 1931, it was 3 units, a 1-car garage, and a store. 57, it's 5 units and a tailor shop, and so on. I mean, I can go over every single one. As recently as a zoning appeal approved in 1988 for 4 units, and there was an occupancy permit issued for 3 units in the 2000s. There was one of the previous owners who purchased it, and I know Mr. Bartram is more familiar, and being a community member, community leader, has a much longer history with this property than I do. I'll admit that, and he's going to get into some of it. But I don't know if that's going to contradict, but I'm happy to submit. The city's own records is what we're going by. In the 2000s, one of the previous owners did some unpermitted work. We're acknowledging that we don't have a occupancy permit for 5 units right now, did some unpermitted work, and that's where the property stands today. It's divided into 5 units, rather large units, and we're asking for the board to legalize that. During our conversations with the Butchers Hill Community Association, we offered to reduce our request to 4 units. We're still willing to do that today, and actually I will change our request from 5 to 4 units. There's 1 parking space on the property. The property owners have made an offer, and I think this still stands to a degree, to lease off-site parking, and I'll let them in a minute talk about where this is. About 2 blocks to the north. The property, in terms of the variance standards, we have established with the zoning administrator, it's his decision to send it either to the zoning board or to the city council. Again, based on that last use, which whether it's expired or not, has not, under the new code, is not considered a single-family dwelling. So we're in front of the board asking for a density variance as well as a parking variance, which is debatable based on the prior uses of the building, whether or not this use is in excess of that and requiring additional parking. However, the property is located on 2 major streets in the northeast corner of Baltimore and Washington. It is the largest lot on that block by about 20%. It's 22 feet wide by 100 feet deep. It contains over 4,500 square feet of floor area. These are, it's a very large building. And if you were to, and I'll let the property owners in a minute describe this, you'd walk through it, it's clearly a multifamily building. The number of units is, up for debate how many it should be. Zoning allows 3 by right. Today I'm going to amend my request to ask for 4 dwelling units. That's a variance of roughly 20%. In terms of the standards for the variance, again, we have the largest lot area on this block face. We also have the largest amount of floor area on the block face. We're also directly across the street from a parcel that contains a 300-unit apartment building directly across Washington Street, known as the Jefferson Square Apartments. So, while this is on the edge of a residential single-family neighborhood, for the most part, there's plenty of multifamily scattered throughout Butchers Hill. It's not a small property in the middle of the block that's a single-family dwelling that's trying to be converted. This is, again, a long history of commercial use, and maybe I'm going to let Mr. Sammer and Mr. Klein just talk a little bit about the interior of the building and some of the architectural or materialist details that indicate that each unit has been there for far longer than 10, 15, or even 20 years.
So I met with the association, with Virgil and a couple of other people from the association I think about a month ago. I was very disappointed after the meeting because the property is designed and built as a multi-dwelling. There's no doubt. You walk in, you have a shell foyer, you have multi-levels. It's not even to the idea of like you go and you split one way or another. You have a flight of stairs and you have a unit, you have another flight of stairs, you have a unit, you have a flight of stairs. So you have 4 different flight of steps to go between the 4 units, and then the first floor operate right now as a whole unit. So the building is already designed as 5 units with the garage in the back. There's almost no to very little work that we need to do. There is 1 unit that I'm sure that the person that owned that before us rented as a separate room. That is a big room in the front that we propose as an efficiency that's missing a kitchen. That's the only unit that I can say that is not, cannot sustain as a full unit. Everything else has their own kitchen, their own bathroom. The bathrooms are all cast iron tubs that has not been made for a long time, and you can tell that it's been put over there a long time ago. So I had a meeting with CHAP over there. They did not have a problem, and they definitely saw the idea of, like, they actually requested me to keep one of the entries to one of the apartments because there is a sash above it, and it clearly shows that it was a separate exterior door to that unit. So I'm not sure who used it as a single family ever. The unit is roughly 4,500 square feet. It's very hard for me to believe that anybody ever used it in the over 100 years of existence, used it as a single family home. And it's hard for me to believe that somebody will use it as a single family home because of the size of it and because of the character of it. So, you know, that's how the property was designed from day one. What happened between the 30s and today, you know, Nate mentioned that it was 5 units plus commercial and a space 4 units and 5 units, different type of zoning, but it most definitely did never operate as a single family unit.
Great, thank you, Don. Yeah. And as Mr. Samra had said, you know, part of the hardship we're facing due to this uniqueness of the property, the lot size, which allowed the square footage that the building contains, it makes it almost impossible for anyone to use it as a single-family dwelling. I don't see any practical way that that is going to happen. You know, so we're here requesting a density variance based on the uniqueness of the property, the hardship we're facing, and we're not sitting here saying that it's a legal 5-unit dwelling. And my clients and we acknowledge that they purchased it at auction. There wasn't an occupancy permit. However, the long history going back to the 30s indicates that it's a multifamily or commercial property. There was one permit issued in the early 80s for a single-family dwelling. I don't know if it was ever occupied or if anyone even lived there, but however, a couple years later, there's zoning appeals made to the board and approved for 3 and 4 units again. So with that, I guess I'll leave you with that now, and maybe you'll be able to respond to we had a meeting with Butchers Hill. I think it just comes down to a fundamental disagreement over the property.
I do have a question though before you
Sure.
move on, because it says in '79 it was disapproved.
Yes.
For 4 dwelling units.
Yes, there's multiple approvals as well as disapprovals, and you look. Then there's one in '88 that was approved for 3 dwelling units. Not knowing the type of people that this line of previous owners, where it seems that there was a lot of not following through, I think including the last previous owner who got some degree of permits but did more work than they should have. So there are several, on the zoning card, several appeals to the zoning board that were disapproved. Probably an equal amount approved or disapproved. They're all asking for the same things. I'm not privy to the details other than what was in the available resolutions, which was the further you go back, the less likely you are to actually find anything. So.
Good afternoon again. Virgil Bartram of the Butchers Hill Land Use Committee. I believe you read Shannon Sneed's first letter for the first appeal that was postponed, and then there's appeal on November 21st that was postponed, and I was given this letter from Shannon on November 21st. Shall I go ahead and read it, or would you like to read it? Or? Thank you. I would like, dear Mr. Tanner and other members of the Board of Municipal Zoning Appeals, I would like to enter my strong objections to the requested appeal for 2000 East Baltimore Street. My opposition to the appeal stems on 3 things: the community opposition to the appeal, the Planning Department's recommendations for disapproval in their report of this appeal, and finally the fact that conversions from 1 to 5 units go through the City Council as a land use ordinance. From there, I have some information also on records.
Can I have a copy of that?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Bertram, I see your note, your letter from the 6th of November, and you said that the quote, we are quite familiar with this property. It has been single family for over 20 years. What's the basis of that statement?
I was just about to say, we knew the owners. They came to our Butchers Hill community meetings for several years. There's Ruben and Rosa Rivera. We saw them all the time. There's a community restaurant around the corner on Fairmount Avenue, and you used to see them in there, and you used to go by their house. They lived in it as a single-family house. I once asked him, "Well, what do you do with all that space?" And he said, "Well, we live there." And And state records show.
Had you been
that-
inside of it before?
What's that?
Had you been inside of it before?
I have not, although they actually kept their windows and curtains open. They had security guards on the windows, but it was kind of like a fish walking by a fishbowl quite often.
Okay.
And I believed them, actually. I mean, they were very sincere people when they came to all of our meetings and many of our meetings, like that. And this was between.
When did they move away?
This was 1996 to 2003 that I was aware, and I kind of lost contact myself, or don't remember myself. Perhaps my neighbors can tell you, but state records show that they sold the house in 2006, and then that property owner was the same property owner who lost the property in 2016. It was foreclosed on by Deutsche Bank in 2016. I have records from 2007 that state where we had received planning department notice that they were applying for 3 units at that time. I walked by the house, the property twice, and reported to Mr. Tanner in March of 2007 that it was not posted prior to the appeal at all. And Mr. Tanner postponed that appeal. I then got, and that was in late March of 2007. I then got emails, which I can show you, are from the property owner who had just moved to New York City, stating that she could not present to us. And, well, by the way, I'm going to change the appeal to 2 units, and I received in the mail floor plans showing 2 units for this property in 2007. I never heard any further of any appeal. I don't know if one was held or if they could have possibly come to the board without our being told. I'm not sure, in 2007.
All right, so that was in 2007, you said?
Yes, March, April 2007.
May 1st, 2007, the board approved the amended request to 2 dwelling units, Appeal 23807. So that was approved by the board. However, I don't think there was ever a permit issued. They have 1 year to get a permit. They may have attempted, they may have filed for it, but it never resulted in something getting issued.
No occupancy permit? Okay, so it wasn't legal?
Well, they didn't have a permit. I don't know if it was legal or not. That was up to others.
It's, okay. The appellant did come to us after the first postponement. They graciously allowed us to tour the property. We saw four kitchens in the property. We did not see firewalls. We did not see fire escapes. We did not see sprinkler systems. In the basement, we saw 1 electric meter and 1 gas meter. Here's a photograph of the property. You can see there are no fire escapes. We found no secondary egress for any of the 2nd and 3rd floor rooms. And again, there were 4 total kitchens, not 5.
Does the amended number from 5 to 4 change the nature of your opposition at all?
No, we have a concern about the parking, I think is the main thing. And the density.
So there's a garage at the end of the property. Is that a single car, double car?
It's a single-car garage. It looks like it's barely wide enough for a modern car.
Oh, yeah, okay.
The garage is 20 feet wide. You can can always no, but it's no problem to make it.
But you're still not gonna get 2 cars in there.
We're willing to.
And you're
get
not going to
also-
get tax credits either.
If they're finished, I may address very briefly a
Just,
couple
just
points.
one at a time, folks.
I'm sorry. One other important thing, in looking through, when we got notice of this appeal, I looked online. The property had been for sale for some time, and I looked at the listings, such as Redfin, and I have 2 other examples here. None of them listed as a multifamily dwelling. So that pretty well tells you if a realtor is not willing to list a property as multifamily, something's wrong, and obviously they don't have the records for multifamily. I have these here.
Lee, anything else you wanted to pass up?
Yes, I had this information.
Oh, yeah, from the prior appeals.
Right, I had the history, and then I have emails from a prior owner. Humbling. I thought, yeah, did you get those apart? I got it. Okay. Thank you, sorry.
Sir?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. My name's Andrew Gray, and I think I need to apologize in advance as I have a short time with my parking meter, so I'll be brief but
You don't
direct.
have to apologize for being brief.
I had a very good professor in college who said, be witty, be quick, be brief. I'll try to be all of those. I moved into the 2000 block of East Baltimore Street in 1994 with my wife. We bought 2014 East Baltimore Street. Since then, we did buy 2016 and 2008 East Baltimore Street. We renovated all 3 of those properties, and in the process reduced the density of those 3 properties from a collective 7 units to 3. We no longer live there, though we do love that neighborhood, and we still maintain those properties the highest quality we can. We provide 2 parking spots for one, 3 for another. We lived there from 1994 to 2010. My wife and I did know Ted and Pat Grillo. They were the owners at the time of 2000 East Baltimore Street. My wife was lucky enough to visit them a few times. It was a single-family home for a very long time, as long as we knew the Grillos. And I think this conforms with what he was saying, that in the early 80s, that the house was approved as a single-family dwelling unit. I've never known it to be a multifamily dwelling unit. The fact that these gentlemen bought the property in September and perhaps had ambitions that were not realistic for the property and paid too much, while being a shame, is not a concern for this body nor for the neighborhood. It is obviously their concern. I wish them well. I don't want them to lose money, but I don't think we should be guaranteeing them profits. If they could make more money at 6 or 7 or 8 units, I don't think we should consider that. A couple of other issues that I would like to mention. This has been described as the largest property on the block. That, in fact, is not true. I own the largest property on the block. That is a combined 2014-2016 East Baltimore Street. It is 36 by 100 feet, and it's 2 dwelling units. I think that serves the community well. You can make money with these larger, fewer units, in my opinion. We're not going to go back and forth. But thank you. Thank you very much. But they do not have the largest property on the block. You have the photographs of it. It is a large Butcher's Hill house, but I don't think it's large enough to sustain that many units. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say, in my experience as somebody that lived on the block, it was a single-family house, and the level of density that they're asking for, I think, is excessive. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
My name is Carol Richmond. I'm a member of the Butchers Hill Land Use Committee. I've been a longtime resident of Butchers Hill for, I think, 31 years. And I was one of the people who took a tour of the house. And the statement that says these are rather large units, 5 units, is incorrect. 2 of the units are roughly 400 square feet, one without a kitchen. The interior of the building is in, I would say, extremely bad shape. There is 1 water meter, 1 electric meter, 1 gas meter for all 5 units. So I'll be brief and say I really oppose the 5 units, since it is currently zoned as a single family. I knew the Grillos. I lived there for a long time. Used to live on South Chester Street. I also knew the other tenants, or the other owners, who use it as a single-family dwelling. So I'm in opposition. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to very briefly address just a couple of those points. First, as a matter of procedure, prior to our originally scheduled hearing, I had called Mr. Bartram and asked to set up a meeting with the community. I think based on some of the history, he felt that the community wasn't open to discussion, which was fine at the time when we came here on the hearing date. I think everyone started to reconsider, especially when we offered to reduce the density. And at that point, we postponed to have a meeting, which we had offered before. It's just a point. Second, regarding the code issues Mr. Bartram brought up, he's correct about all of those, but that's why we're here today, to get an approval for a land use that we can then go and apply for, whether a building permit's needed or an occupancy permit, as the board members well know, which will bring the property into compliance for whatever that may be. Second, this request is not based on a desire to make money, and just taken a little aback by it because Mr. Klein and Mr. Samaret do this type of thing all the time, and this wasn't looked at as a money grab. I know that's not relevant mostly to the zoning hearing, but as well, being the single-family dwelling, the city's records, according to the zoning administrator, and his reason for sending it to the zoning board is because their last authorized use was for 3 dwelling units. I don't know how that would have been issued, but there was a zoning approval for multifamily, whether it's 2 or 3. So the planning department's own staff report indicates that there was a 3-unit building that, in their view, was lapsed because of lack of use. Sure, that's all true, but that indicates there was a 3-unit. And I'm not sure why the planning department decides to supplant their own view of the conditional use ordinance in light of the zoning administrators, whose authority it is. But we had that decision. We used that to come to the zoning board. And I would... the last point is we're willing to reduce the request from 5 units to 4. That's 19% variance. There's this large unit that Carol here was referring to, and I guess it depends on what you consider large. When I walk in, it has high ceilings. It's a gorgeous, I could, it's no different than in other units that are provided. And frankly, in my opinion, it's better. And I guess I'll just leave you with that. I believe we meet the uniqueness standards as well as the hardship for variance. It's a minimum variance necessary. This is a very large property. Regards to, I'm sorry, what was your last name?
Andrew Gray.
Mr. Gray's house, that was originally 2 lots. It was consolidated at one point, but as far as this being the largest original structure, that remains true. He is correct that it was consolidated. So that's semantics, but I'm sorry.
Not at all.
And I'll let Mr. Klein add something.
Well, I just wanted to address the zoning board. I appreciate your time today. I will actually be very short. We just want to do the right thing. We bought this property at auction. Based on our investigation, we did a site survey. We pulled the permits as they were available. We looked for use and occupancy permits. There were no use and occupancy for single-family home. We saw a variety of issues, whether it was 3 units, then 5 units, then 4 units. Then we did a site survey. We saw maybe there was some unpermitted work, and it was set up for 4 units or maybe 5 units, but certainly 4. And when we purchased the property, we understood that we need to fix it. And that's all I really want to do is fix it. And we would really want to do 5 units. We understand the community's concerned about parking and about density. I am more than happy to take it down to a 4-unit building, which is less than a 20% variance on what I can get by right. And we are willing to get off-site parking to help alleviate some parking concerns. There's a 300-unit building going up literally 100 feet away, so I'm not entirely sure where the uniqueness of the property in that it's a residential neighborhood comes into play. But from our perspective, we did, in a perfect world, would we have been able to suss all this stuff out? I guess the answer could have been yes, but based on the information that we had and based on the conversations that we had with our zoning council as well as other conversations we had with other people in the city, we believe that we could take what was existing and bring it up to code. We agree that there isn't the required egress and ingress for fire escape or safety, and I want to fix all of that. I want to put in partition walls. I want to put in firewalls. I'm not the 7-unit guy doing the slumlord thing. We run good properties. We just want to run a good, decent facility. I don't want to be a blight on the neighborhood, but in order to get moving, I have to get approvals. And yes, it is in a poor state because the people that ran it before didn't get all the approvals, and they kind of just did what they want, which unfortunately happens more than we would like to admit in the city. And all we're asking for is the opportunity to take the building to 4 units and bring it up to code. That's all we're really asking for, and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you all.
All right, thanks. Yeah, that's you. Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck to you.
No, it's okay.
2017-436, 3327 St. Paul Street. Albert. Actually, folks, can I ask you to step back for a minute? Because I think that we've got a shorter case that we can get through and
Understand.
bring you back up.
No problem.
So you step back, let's call 2017-458, 4901 Frankfurt Avenue, Shasheen Maple. Good evening, ma'am. All right, Ms. Maple, we have this as an application to use Unit B for a driving school classroom. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. For all those intending to give testimony, can raise their right hands and be sworn, please.
So you swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Do we have staff reports?
Yes, first we have a letter dated December 13th from Harbell. They write that the property at issue falls within the boundaries of the Frankfurt Improvement Association. The president advises the appellant has not approached the association concerning this appeal, nor has he provided the association with his plans for the new use of this location. As they have not been provided with any information to evaluate the proposal, the association is requesting the board to postpone the hearing of this appeal until the applicant has met with the association. If this cannot be accomplished, the Frankfurt opposes the appeal. The association's position in this matter would request the BMZ postpone the appeal. If it cannot be accomplished, we too would oppose the appeal. Okay, then there's planning's report.
Thank you. Planning Department reviewed this application, noted that this request comes with a requirement in the zoning code for parking to be provided off-street in the amount of 1 space per 4 employees plus 1 space per 25 students, and there was no statement in the application material available to the Planning Department as to the size of the proposed facility. The department has no specific objection to it, however, and recommends that approval of this application be subject to the condition that the applicant will provide and continue to provide a sufficient number of on-site parking spaces to serve the driver education school, as there is on-site parking available. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and Ms. Maple, are those conditions stated by the Planning Department acceptable to you?
They are.
Okay. You folks spoke before the hearing. Get anything worked out? No?
No, the only thing I could do is Mr. Henry read my letter, is asked that Ms. Maple postpone the appeal, and she's declined to do so.
Okay, all right. So, Ms. Maple, why don't you tell us about what you're looking to do here?
I've currently operated a driving education school at that Frankfurt location adjacent to the building we are in now. The location I have now is at 4905 Frankfurt Avenue. We're in the back side of the building where it's one way in, one way out. So when the space became available in front of the location, I asked could I rent that space, and I was approved by the owner to utilize the space. The space is has parking spaces in front, and I was still conducting my business the same way I have for the past 2 years and 6 months. Whereas the instructors that comes there, they have a driving school vehicle. We only need 1 parking space for that instructor. The other instructors pick the students up from home. No student have a driver's license, so they should not be driving to the facility. And when they register online, over the phone, or by email. So there's no one just dropping in. And this has been my practice for the last 2 years, 6 months at the adjacent building. I'm considering the safety of my staff, my potential students, and my current students, so that they don't have to come in the back of that building at night. It gets dark, and it's not a very, the neighborhood has changed a lot in the past 2 years. So I would like to stay in the community, but I have asked the landlord, I did give him a letter of intent to leave the community altogether if I can't move it to the front.
Okay. And so what parking will you have available to you?
It's 4 parking spaces in front of the building currently.
All right. And how many other tenants are there in the building?
None. I would be the only tenant.
Okay. You'd be the first tenant or the only tenant?
The only. There's 3. Is a liquor store. There's a Chinese restaurant on the left of me, and to the right of me is a liquor store. So they have their own parking spaces in front of their buildings. So
You have 4 allocated to you?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hilliard?
Mike Hilliard, Community Service Director of Harbell Community Organization. I'm not going to waste the board's time reiterating what Mr. Henry already read in the record, which is my letter to the board. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And Ms. Maple, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Had I had known that they wanted to meet with me prior, I would have been more than happy to meet with them. I had no idea that there was any opposition. I've been there for 2 years and 6 months, and I have never had any issues being back there. I've always been available to any and every person that came through my door. So I had no idea. Had I had, I would have communicated and did whatever was required, if within my rights.
All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Do we leave now? Do we wait?
It's up to you.
We can wait if you
Get a
want.
letter in the mail or something? Okay.
All right. We're going to go off the record for 5 minutes.
2.5.
It's been a long afternoon. Well, I didn't know. I don't see you with them. I see, that's why yes.
Yeah, well, I'm going to do the same thing.
Oh, here we go. Here's the Matt's exits. Take 5 minutes and then
Derek, I thought this was your easy day.
supposed to be.
Compared to what you have at home, it probably is.
I was gonna say, yeah. Well, I guess we're.
Yes, you might want to watch what you say.
Yeah. Make sure that you note it when you're testifying. Just make sure that you note it.
He was asking earlier how long does the hearing last?
Oh, yeah, yeah, I just want to.
Again, I've been out in and out, so I'm not sure either.
I'll also mention, I gave one to Ms.
You want to hand these packets out now? You're gonna wait? Okay.
Al, could you read this in the record?
The only relevant point is that it's owned by the Roland Park Company. I couldn't read any of it either.
Nice looking handwriting.
That's the lost art.
Now, I lost that art for sure. I can't even read my own handwriting. If you're a Baltimore property history buff, there's some interesting stuff in this package you guys
Oh, thank you.
You have enough? Okay, good. And they already have mine. What?
BMZ can't afford me after my contract's up next year.
Well, no, it's in the record.
Data package for 436?
No, I do not.
Okay, me either.
I'm thinking it's probably because we've heard it before.
That's never stopped.
It's okay. It's okay.
We have it on our big toy.
Oh, is it on there?
Get your name, sir, and before we start, just get your name.
Give him his name so you can spell him.
Arkesh. Sharma.
Oh, yeah.
You have my letter, but I didn't change it.
No, I have it. You told me that.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm like, man, you can't afford my salary after my next year, last year's contract.
I have yours.
Oh, that's what we gotta wait for Jay.
Okay. No, I'm just saying, okay, I feel better.
Circulator lives.
Today, it was obviously a very
The
large.
circulator lives.
You don't put a kitchen in the front.
Keep it going.
Happening originally.
Maybe not, maybe I won't be able to get to work if it doesn't happen.
Well, it depends on how things work out. Yep. I think we're okay now. Circulator.
Oh, no, okay.
Lives for another year.
Yeah. That's
It's a good thing.
That's a long time to be able to say something's good.
Some of these articles recently, comments saying, oh, the conditions are terrible and disgusting. The buses are fine. They're clean.
Oh, about the circulator
They're
or,
clean, they're well run, the staff is nice. I just,
and the price is right.
the price is definitely.
You put up with a lot for that.
You really can. Bring a little whisk broom with you. I see all the people that stand at the bus stops on St. Paul Street every morning. It's like, that's a circulator.
Tons of people.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a real benefit in the time of hard times. I'd like to see it all over the city.
Okay. All right, ready? And we'll go back on the record. Calling 2017-436, 3327 St. Paul Street. Mr. Berry. We have this as an application to expand the existing first floor restaurant into a portion of the second floor. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. All those intending to give testimony can raise their right hands to be sworn, please.
Swear or affirm the testimony that you're about to give in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
We have staff reports.
Thank you. Planning Department reviewed this application, noted that this is a proposal to increase the size of the restaurant by adding 1/2 of the equivalent floor area on the first floor to the second floor level. This would therefore increase the requirement for off-street parking to be provided in support of that. The department recommends approval of the application, subject to the condition that the applicant provides off-street parking for the additional floor area of the restaurant in accordance with requirements contained in Table 16-406 of the zoning code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. French. All right, and Mr. Berry, those conditions stated by the planning department acceptable to your client?
Well, we're going to talk to you about the parking that is provided under an agreement with Union Memorial Hospital in the parking garage directly across the street. It's been in existence for 20 years. I'm also authorized by Union Memorial to speak on their behalf in support of this.
Okay, so the answer would be yes.
Yes.
Okay, but thank you for the detail. All right, so why don't you tell us what we have in front of us?
Okay, I'd like to hand out to the board, I previously gave the board staff and Councilwoman Clark a package of information which directly provides a chronology of the history of this property and existing buildings, since that was a large amount of the board's discussion at the previous zoning board hearing.
Thank you.
In the package, you'll find a list of copies of original material that talks about the nature of the building, which was, again, the subject of whether or not 3327 qualified for neighborhood commercial, since the zoning code has a provision dealing with original construction. And thanks to Councilwoman Clark, she provided some information which speaks to some of that. I think she drew the wrong conclusion, and to be fair, she did not have the benefit of our research, which we did in the Land Records Office of Baltimore City through the deeds going back to 1913. She didn't have the benefit of research at the Hopkins Library, which dealt with the records of the Roland Park Company, which was one of the 1913 owners of this property. We also went to the Enoch Pratt Maryland room, which discovered some more supplemental material from the telephone directory. So just to summarize this, the 1913 deed that has the property owned by the Roland Park Company as part of Guilford, might not be seen as Guilford nowadays, but it is Guilford, was Guilford at the time, went through a series of transactions. The transactions went from the Roland Park Company to a developer. The Roland Park Company, the developer then got approval from the Roland Park Company to put a store in the adjacent row houses. That's all documented in your records. They then went to the city and got approval from the city to operate the store while the building, I think, was under construction, because in 1928, February of 1928, the property had been subdivided by the developer to individual homes and was transferred, and the deed that you have also refers to the transfer not of a property, but a property which includes a partition wall, so indicating that it was a building that was transferred in 1928. And that sale, more importantly, went to the Katz brothers as opposed to a husband and wife or a single entity. The last thing I'll just point out to you is that then there was city zoning records in 1931, which indicate the police survey, which indicate there was a store. There was a telephone directory, which indicates the Katz brothers operated a grocery store there. I don't think there's any way that you could not have the conclusion that the building, which was approved by the Roland Park Company, approved by the city for a store, was transferred soon after and built soon after that as a store, would not meet the definition of originally constructed for a store. So that's the first hurdle I'd like you to, and Mr. Pruddle, my office is here, can testify, because he found these records working with the Hopkins Library and the Maryland Room and the Land Records Office, if that's important. Most of you were here during the original presentation where we asked for the entire second floor, and the chairman then questioned whether or not they had the ability to do that, since clearly 3325 was not originally constructed as a store. And so we took that, board voted on it, it was a 2-2 vote. Ms. Bonner did not hear all the testimony. Without belaboring it as much as we did that day, I will say that we believe that we also meet the requirements of the zoning code, that this is a substantial alteration. As the planning department notes, it's approximately 50% less than the original application, and it's only for the one building. The other thing I would mention is that the area itself certainly would facilitate, first of all, as an original store, my client, who will testify as to the parking use, he's operated for 25 years. He's been a terrific neighbor. There was one period where he leased the upper floor, which is the source of Councilwoman Clark's original complaint. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the use of the second floor for his restaurant. We have an agreement you'll hear about from the Charles Village Association in support of this and with conditions. And I would ask that you find that given the nature of the surrounding area, which is high density, the Charles Village Master Plan, which was worked on with the city and myself, call for the St. Paul Street corridor to become a mixed-use corridor. There's been a lot of development on both sides of St. Paul Street below 33rd Street for commercial, mixed-use commercial and residential use. The parking that surrounds this property is all either residential permit parking or metered parking. And because of that, there is not a parking issue, but despite the fact that there's an availability of parking at meters, they've negotiated a agreement with Union Memorial Hospital to provide free ticket stubs for parking in the garage, which is immediately across the street, if you're familiar with it, at 33rd and St. Paul Street, Union Memorial Garage. 34th and St. Paul Street. So we don't think, we can certainly continue to provide that in accordance with the Councilwoman's wishes. We think the standards, that we went into this in some detail, be glad to repeat them for Ms. Bonner's benefit. Meeting for conditional use are met, and with the documentation on the original construction, it meets the definition of neighborhood commercial. As the board knows, there's no provision in the zoning code that restricts expansion of neighborhood commercial within the structure. And we would ask the board to approve the application today. And if there's any questions of either the owner or, and then we'll have Sandy Sparks from the Community Association testify for us.
No, Ms. Sparks?
We, in the process of working on this issue, have reached an agreement that was attached to our letter. It's our standard agreement that we have when, in most cases, when there's a liquor license involved, and this property does have a liquor license. So eventually, this will go to the liquor board to be presented, and that agreement will go with that request. We've had an excellent relationship with the owner, Chris, and I want to make certain that you all know what a pleasant operation we have there as a family restaurant. Almost any time you go in there, you can see a family with small children. It operates 7 days a week. It serves breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's not open late, 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock on Friday and Saturday, so that's very reasonable. And it's a very popular place, and I do know that Union Memorial has great interest in this expansion because they like to be able to have more events or lunches there. We strongly support this.
Great, thank you.
I don't have anything else unless there are questions about the material. We tried to summarize and outline, highlight for you some of the references to a store through the various deeds and documents.
Question, I'm sorry, I probably missed it, I was reading your package, but what the uses of the expanded space are going to be?
It's going to be a continuation of the existing restaurant downstairs. It's not a third-party use, which the previous complaints were about, a third-party nightclub, which had to be closed down. And this is going to be operated in the same fashion as and by the same owner, and that's part of the agreement, same hours.
And I recall the prior hearing, there was a lot of discussion, testimony about upstairs bar, I believe, and an area. Is that in play?
The only expansion at this point is for a room. The bar is on the other side, where the nightclub was. That's an existing bar. That's all going to be partitioned off, so we don't have access to it. So this would just be the expansion of the restaurant. We do hope, just for the board's, at the board's suggestion, I think at one of the last hearings, was that we do think that the definition of neighborhood commercial needs to be changed to become a little more flexible than requiring the hours of research to document the original construction that we did for this particular property. We don't know that, in some people's minds, that may have been the intent, but we're not sure that it is, and we've already started talking and hope to have the city council approve something. But at the minute, for the moment, the owner wants to go ahead and get this approval, which we think is entirely within the board's authority as a conditional use.
Councilwoman.
Thank you. Thank you. Mary Pat Clark, Baltimore City Council, here in opposition to the granting of this appeal. I have reviewed Mr. Barry's testimony. He provided it to me as we came in today, and I think the case that I would like to make to you about the origins of this property remain the same as I had the benefit of writing up and presenting to you. So I have given you a packet which has attached to the front today's letter. And then behind it is the letter of the earlier hearing referred to back in October. Where the appeal was disapproved. Behind that is the zoning board's disapproval several years ago of the application by the same owner for use of the upstairs. And the reason that I included is that on page 3, beginning on page 3 of that recommendation for disapproval, is a history of the operation of this particular restaurant and its second floor. And let me just say, by way of review, I'm not going into details about that today because I've attached that, I've testified. But I would ask that this packet be entered into the file in its entirety so that all the different arguments that were made will be in any appeal of a decision. At least it'll be available. Thank you for that. I'm going to read you parts of the letter because it outlines my 3 major objections and reasons for opposing. In opposing this appeal, I would argue that, A, Sun articles in 1927, everybody knows by now that in order to be eligible for this new conditional use, the property in question has to have been originally constructed and used for a commercial purpose. It can't be a row house that looks like a row house, used like a row house, that maybe later on made alterations and became a commercial use. It has to start life that way. So 1, the Sun articles that I have enclosed, and they will be the first things you see after you open the folder itself, from 1927 and 1929 indicate that the first floor of 3327 St. Paul Street was not originally constructed or used as a non-residential entity, therefore fails to meet requirements for conditional use through neighborhood commercial establishment provisions of the 2017 code. B, this appeal fails to meet the 1-year requirements of the zoning code's section 5-205 reapplication waiting period. We're back real soon with something really like what we just had disapproved. C, past history and appeal plats give rise to fears that the vacant 1/2 second floor will easily morph into the entire second floor without further notice to the zoning board or public recourse. We know how long it took to get public recourse before. And that was an appeal had not been filed until we finally got the citations issue that promoted the appeal process back then. All right, the articles that I bring to your attention, and I don't think that anything that is in the sponsor's presentation runs counter to my belief that this is a valid cutoff, that these articles demonstrate this was not built as a commercial property, and it wasn't used as one in its origins. It might have had an S, it might have had Roland Park talking to Guilford, etc., but I'm talking about government action. So let me just go through this, if I may. Sun article of December 10th, 1927. The Sun article of December 10th, 1927, headline, Osborne approves permit for St. Paul Grocery, reports the permit approval of a fancy grocery at 3327 St. Paul Street amidst protests of that use by neighbors at that time in that same row house block face. So there were neighbors protesting this in December of 27. To quote Mr. Charles Osborne, who granted the permit. Quote, organizations and residents of the neighborhood protested the store, Mr. Osborne said. They contend that it is no place for a store, but I do not agree with them. They have the right of appeal to the mayor, however, and a hearing doubtless will be held by the Board of Zoning Appeals at the request of the mayor, unquote. Why were neighbors protesting that they didn't want a grocery store? They were a residential neighborhood. They lost if there was a store there. Now, Sun article 2 years later, August 17th, 1929, just 2 years. The Sun article of August 17th, 1929, headline, denies permit for bookshop at 3327 St. Paul Street, seems to indicate that 3327 St. Paul never established the fancy grocery store, issued a permit in 1927 because 2 years later, the city denied permits for another commercial use, to quote that article. Walter Hammond, he was the engineer of buildings, denied permits for a lone library and bookstore at 3327 St. Paul Street and a drugstore at 29th and Oak. Different, he made two decisions. He said he could not approve the permits because the library, that was for our subject property, and the drugstore would be in exclusively residential districts. Emphasis my own, 2 years later. So this is a property that was constructed and existing, and in 27 neighbors were fighting against, and maybe won, maybe because we have no evidence anywhere that they built the permit that was issued went forward. 2 years later, the city issued a permit, denied a permit, because it was a totally residential neighborhood. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. So I think I'm perfectly comfortable with the research that has been done, and I don't think it contradicts my own interpretation. Second reason, this appeal fails to meet the requirements of Section 5-205 of the 2017 Zoning Code, which reads, in general, within 1 year after an application for a variance or a conditional use has been denied, October 2017, The same application for the same property may not be reviewed or heard unless substantial new evidence is available. B, resubmission within 1 year. If a zoning application is resubmitted for the same property within the 1 year period, the subsequent application must include a detailed description of how the application is a, my quotes, substantially different request or how substantial new evidence justifies its consideration, emphasis my own. Ladies and gentlemen, well, let me read what I wrote so I'll get it right. But basically, it's the second floor. It would have been the whole second floor, perhaps, except it's clear that the south end of this complex, we all know it was residential because we saw it all change to commercial not too many years ago. So just, if I may read. Basically, this appeal, 436 of December 5th, 2017, and postponed, is a smaller version of Appeal 377 of October 24th, 2017, with just 6 weeks intervening. Skipping. The property already benefits from a 100% non-conforming use expansion, which doubles the size of the first floor restaurant, despite the zoning code's restriction of the time of board authority to 25% variances of this kind. This was not this current board. It was a past board that granted 100%. The current appeal is in response to ineligibility of half of the property. The revised appeal retains the same kitchen size and location and retains the same bathroom location as the original appeal, with one less toilet, I think, and omission of the former 12-stool bar. The revised appeal maintains 64% of the original appeals table seating. This is the second floor appeal. It's just a smaller second floor, but it's the same pretty much as what was before this board in October. The only new evidence I have come across is the Sun articles that I cited above and before. It seems evident that 3327 St. Paul is also ineligible for the zoning code's neighborhood commercial use. Finally, C, past history and appeal plats give rise to fears that the one half of the second floor left vacant. So we have a vacant, residentially zoned second floor, half of a second floor. Will gradually morph into expansion into the entire second floor without further notice to the zoning board or public recourse. It took us years the last time around with the den. I'm not going through all that again because I've been through it, and that has been submitted as part of my testimony from October. The den operated without permission of the liquor board on the Tambers liquor license for years. It became such a late-night undergraduate drinking spot that Northern District police officers came to me and asked me to do something because of the dangers, especially to undergraduate girls, young women, from neighboring colleges. I had been trying to do something at the time, but I've never had a police officer come up and ask me to do something about a bar. It's usually vice versa. So that's gone because we won the zoning appeal. We stopped the zoning appeal that grew out of the zoning administrators and inspectors' realization that we had a problem here, that this second floor bar, nighttime spot, was operating in a residentially zoned and second floor And so it was out of zoning compliance, which forced the application to get into compliance, which was denied. So I'm afraid, because of how long it took that process to work years ago. It's a second floor. It's like, it's this one, it's that one. Whose license is it? Who's really running the second floor? Have the hours changed? I don't know. I just lived through it, and I don't want to have to live through it again on behalf of my community and a lot of kids who are attracted to that place like a den was. So thank you very much for hearing me out, and thanks for your consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Berry?
Well, to summarize, I believe you have substantial new evidence, certainly on the issue of neighborhood commercial and original intent. There is no way that one can read that chronology and putting the newspaper articles in with the deed transfers. The residents that the article may have been referred to would not have been the adjacent row houses because they were being built at the time. They were not there before the store. The plans were approved by the Roland Park Corporation. They were sold to the Katz brothers. I don't know for sure whether the Katz brothers opened a store. Maybe they tried to put another use in there, but it was built as a store. The zoning board's own records, the city's own records show that in 1931 to...
Original, it goes back to 27.
No, the original building was built in 1928. And it follows all those approvals as a store. Now, I don't know what else the board would need to, but first of all, that's substantial new evidence. The reduction of from 2 buildings to 1 building is a substantial reduction. Councilwoman Clark, who I think, frankly, is trying to represent herself in this because of the old litigation that went on for that prior use. This owner was not the one who was running that den. We have an agreement with the community association that prevents that from happening. He's been a great neighbor for 25 years. He will continue to be a great neighbor, and that we think that neighborhood commercial as a conditional use with the conditions approved by the neighborhood association should be approved by the board. And you can put in the continuation of the parking agreement with Union Memorial. As I said, I'm here on behalf as well of Union Memorial, which authorized me, as they're an adjacent neighbor right behind this property. If it was a problem, you think Union Memorial worked with Councilwoman Clark to get the den removed. They want this to happen. They asked me to just tell you that. And if there are any other questions, I would hope the board would approve it this time.
Question of fact, I have, if I may just interject one thing. Am I correct or not that this is the same gentleman that has owned and operated this facility all these years?
He's operated Tambers all these years, not the den.
Oh, yeah, but it was on his license.
Okay, let me speak something. Your 1997, 87, when I come to this country, I wash the dishes, start from Captain James. I lease the place, I run the place 24 hours, and operated nice and clean. Then I went back country, took 1 year. I came back, I opened Petro's place called 4 North Extra Street, right across the main post office. I ran the place 6 months, and then I sold to someone. After that, I went to the place called Saratoga Street, 6 West Saratoga, 206 Saratoga Street, called Christos. It used to be Harbor Beef. I run that place year, and I sold to someone. There was a pizza delivery. I deliver all over the place, and I cook. After that, I went to Overly Diner. I run that place. Have no problem. I have a liquor license. I did not use it because the clientele that type, I did not use it. I came to the Tambers. I run the place. I did not have a liquor license. I delivered the pizza, delivered the food, and after that, we tried to span the next door house. Zoning board gave us 25%. We don't want to do it. Came back again, they give us a 99%. We put all the money on interest, we use it, second floor is still vacant, burden on our head, still working it, paying bills, and 25 years, any complaint on first floor, Miss Mary Pat Clerk, let me know. Last 25 years, I've been running the place.
I don't disagree about that.
Folks, frankly, the experience with the den is irrelevant to what we're looking at right now. Now, I have a question.
Yes.
This telephone directory, do we know
a date?
What the vintage is of that?
Good afternoon. Nate Prettle, AB Associates, and just to note about some of these historical documents, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that is from the Baltimore Address and Telephone Directory. I believe it was the Chesapeake and Potomac Company at the time. This came from the Maryland Department of the Enoch Pratt Library, from the very earliest one they have, which was 1932, clearly showing the Katz brothers. We can use that just that relates to after this structure was built in 1928 by the developer, Mr. Bielmeier, and sold the very next year to the Katz brothers. And and it also relates to the article that Councilwoman Clark submitted. There are other uses in there, whether they were on another part of the building, who knows? But it's a clear line.
The Katz brothers purchased the building and they established a grocery store.
I think outside of being at the grand opening, there's not going to be any more evidence other than that the Roland Park Company files show a store building and 8 houses being built. In 27 was their approval, building permit the next year. Katz Brothers Groceries open.
I would disagree. That 32 is not 28.
That would be true, although the owner of the building in 28, once it was constructed, was the Katz brothers, who subsequently were also the ones who established a grocery store there. And we also have the records from the approval from the Roland Park Company for the plans. Now, was anyone there? No, but the question is, looking over these documents, what's the most reasonable conclusion? So it's
go with government.
We're not in criminal court. We're not talking about elimination of all reasonable doubt and all that kind of thing. We operate on preponderance of the evidence. So what is more likely than not? Is it more likely that the Katz brothers purchased the property in 28 and that they established a grocery store there and it was still in existence in 1932? Or is it more probable that they purchased the property, it was used as maybe apartments or something, and then maybe their tenant moved out, and then they decided in 32 to put a store in there? That's possible, but what is more likely than not? So, and that's what we have to decide, but I think that we sort of got that.
Okay, that was like a rhetorical question, because basically I very definitely think that what happens in the private sector is important. But until there are governmental permit actions taken for construction, for occupancy and use, or call it just use, that it's not official, it's just between private parties. And that's what I'm looking at, and I have no problem with the chronology that has been put together whatsoever, because I see that, basically, reports of official actions post-date construction and use.
Okay. Anything else?
There are some city official actions, which I've put there. So I would ask the board to acknowledge the whole record and find that we meet the standards for conditional use to allow this gentleman to expand into the second floor for his restaurant, benefiting the neighborhood of Charles Village.
I guess I missed the joke, but I would like to say.
I asked Mr. Berry if there was anything further. He began to talk. I then said, you can say no.
Oh, okay, thank you. I feel,
Point well
thank
taken.
you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. Happy holidays. And rough ride.
Somebody did something about our POTUS. He does, he has the right to remain silent, right?
All right.
God. How are we supposed to cipher each and every one of those neighborhood commercial cases without that kind of evidence?
Well,
Yeah.
we interpret the fact that really what was legislatively intended was privacy. People didn't want to have commercial establishments in residential neighborhoods. They did want to make a limited exception for these structures and uses that were always intended to be there. And so they wanted to have some sort of a savings provision to allow them to stay there. And so they wrote what they wrote for that reason, that is to allow them to stay there, but to also still make it clear that you don't want commercial establishments in residential areas. So if people have to come up with rather exhaustively, research stuff like this, well, somebody else with more clout than me said that that's what they wanted them to do. If they're gonna go back and change that, and it sounds like they're maybe discussing that, well, do that too. I also think that it's not that big of an undertaking, but anyways, so where are we gonna start?
Dinner.
That's a good idea. Oh, and 2016-372, north side of Graceland Avenue, 625 feet of Ogden Street. All right, so that is a no-show. And we will dismiss that. And then we had a no-show consent. I guess call them and find out what went on there. Okay, the cell phone towers.
I was okay with it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, anyone want to talk about that one? The 7 apartments on St. Paul Street.
I was a no. I didn't see any hardship. And I know I know the other argument.
Yeah. I was telling Frank that there was a provision actually under the code that allows us to attach conditions to variances now. So actually, the community was a little bit more constructive. They could have negotiated whatever conditions they wanted to attach to the to any kind of variance that he was seeking, because we can deny what he's seeking. That is that 5th unit, and I'm with Frank. I don't think that he showed the criteria were met for a variance, but. If they'd wanted to, they could have taken advantage of that provision, but at the same time, I'm not really sure that he's the most reliable person to do that. Then I run down to Baltimore Street. And there, David, I guess the question is, we've got it in the records that there was only one dwelling unit that was approved, and that goes back for some time. There's testimony as well. And then
82.
Yeah, and then we've got sort of some stuff in the record, looks like maybe since 2007 or 2009, where there was an approval for 3, but that they never sought to pull a permit on it, so it lapsed. So I guess the question then is, from a conversion standpoint, what qualifies as the use? Is it what gets approved or what's permitted / used? I don't know if that may just be something that we have to figure out, but I didn't know if there was some direction elsewhere on that.
Well, I believe it's the issuance of an occupancy permit. In other words, they bring the building up to code and get the permit. And I think that's what the zoning administrator's problem was with this whole thing, because the evidence was perhaps they brought up the code, but for some technical reason, the permit didn't get issued. That'd be one story. But if they just failed to do what was necessary to get approval for the permit, that's another. So I can understand why the zoning administrator was conflicted and wanted to put it on our lap to trying to sort it out. But the 2007 case started out as 3, and then they amended it to bring it down to 2, and that got approved. But for some reason,
You never did anything with it. Okay, I mean, because to me, it was pretty clear that the history shows that it's just a single family. I didn't know if those other appeals sort of altered that at all. So.
I couldn't find anything in the record to support that.
All right. Now, 3327 St. Paul.
I was okay with it.
Me as well. Anyone else? Any others that folks want to talk about? Okay. Hearing no reply, let's just go to vote. All right. 2016-372 north side of Graceland Avenue, 625 feet of Ogden Street as a no-show and is dismissed. 2017-369, 220 East 31st Street. I am a yes with conditions stated by the planning department.
Yes. Agreed.
Yes.
Yes.
2017-404, 2934 St. Paul Street. I'm a no.
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 Agreed.
2017-413, 2000 East Baltimore Street. I'm a no.
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 I'm a no.
2017-448, 2604 Gibbons Avenue was by consent.
Skip 436.
Oh, 2017-436. Yes. 2017-436, 3327 St. Paul Street. I'm a yes.
Yes. Agreed.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to say with planning department conditions on that one. 2017-448, 2604 Gibbons Avenue was by consent. 2017-451, 4015 Foster Avenue was by consent and planning department conditions. 2017-453, 1625 Thames Street was by consent and planning department conditions. 2017-454, 1501 Edmondson Avenue. Why do I have a question mark next to this one?
I was okay with it.
That was okay.
I was okay with that one too.
Okay, I'm a yes. 'Cause since it doesn't really matter. 2017-456, 3907 West Strathmore Avenue was by consent. 2017-458, 4901 Frankfurt Avenue. I'm a yes.
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 Agreed.
And then, did you guys have conditions with that one too, Martin? Maintain the parking, yeah. Which she's already got. 2017-459, 2838 Hickory Avenue was by consent. 2017-460, 229 North Monroe Street. I'm a. Why do I have a check next to that one?
It's just a grocery store.
Yeah, I'm a yes.
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 Yep, I'm agreed.
Need drawings. Oh well. 2017-461, 1924, 1926, and 1928 East Pratt Street. I'm a yes.
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 Agreed.
2017-462, 3738 Gulf Street was a no-show.
Yes. I'm a yes on the no-show.
Your last vote, the Maverick.
Wanted to put somebody down.
All right, take care, folks.
Ma'am, I just wanted to let you know that I'm gonna talk to the